Okay, welcome. Today's webinar is one that I think, really represents to me a lot. As a matter of fact, it's kind of about my life's work, which is getting attorneys jobs and finding ways for them to get jobs and reasons that you're not getting interviews. So when you're looking for jobs, one of the things that I notice the most, and I want to encourage everyone that's on this webinar to, listen carefully to what I'm saying about why you're not getting interviews and the reasons for it, which in most cases you should never take personally. If you're not getting interviews, there's a lot of things probably you're doing wrong, but there's also reasons that you're not getting interviews. So today, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the reasons you may not be getting interviews, just so you really don't take it personally. I'm going to tell you what I do as a recruiter with my candidates to get them interviews when there's issues with these sorts of things. Now, I'm not on this call to recruit you. I'm not on this call to tell you how great of a recruiter I am at BCG. What I am doing is I'm sharing with you 25 years of experience and my life's work in getting attorneys positions. And again, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know an awful lot about how to get attorneys positions. I've seen what's happened to thousands of my candidates, or tens of thousands, when they're looking for jobs and the reasons they're getting rejected. And at the outset, I want to just make a couple points to you. Regardless of whether you're at a top law firm and went to a top law school, or you didn't go to a great law school and are a bad firm, I mean, regardless of your situation, you can always get interviews. But in addition to that, every attorney, regardless of whether they're applying on their own or through BCG, has to send a lot of applications in order to get interviews. When I say a lot, I mean, if you're applying for just jobs and things and you're maybe in a rare location, in a rare practice area where there's a lot of demand and not a lot of attorneys, you may not have to apply to as many places. But in general, people that get jobs and when attorneys are looking for jobs, I want you to understand kind of what's going on with your peers. Your peers sometimes will apply to 50 or 100 firms before they get an interview. And this includes many attorneys. And there's all sorts of reasons that they're not getting interviews, but smart people understand that rejection is not something you should take seriously. Attorneys get very used to rejection. You should be used to it when you're in law school and get rejected. When people are applying for summer associate jobs from top law firms, most of the firms that they interview with don't give them offers. I mean, regardless of your situation, you are not getting interviews many times because of reasons that are really beyond your control. The only thing, by the way, that is within your control is your ability to continually be applying to places and to really run your job search in a way that's going to get you a job, to learn about what I'm talking about today, to watch videos I've done that are reviewing resumes and fix your resume, to think very strategically about applying to jobs just in your practice area, not in other practice areas, to run your search in a way that you have explanations for things that are going to come up, to apply quickly to firms before other people do, to really make your job search like a job. One thing that I tell attorneys, and I think this is a very important point, the quality of you as an attorney, your ability to represent yourself and get a job is no different than what you would need to do to effectively represent a client. If you were a good attorney representing a client, you would be fighting for that person and doing whatever it takes to get that person a job. I was talking yesterday to an attorney who had fought a case against another attorney. And the attorney that they fought the case with was just filing motion after motion, and doing this and that, and trying to undermine the other attorneys on the other side, their attorneys, and trying to influence judges and trying to, get in front of a judge instead of a jury. I mean, this is what good attorneys do. They fight and fight and fight. And if you're looking for a job, you need to fight and fight and fight too. The quality of you as an attorney is based on your ability to fight and how much you fight for a job and how much you fight to find certain firms to work at. Just completely, everything is within your control. It's the locations you search. It's the number of jobs you apply to. It's about applying to firms without opening. It's about, there's so much that goes into it that people don't, do. One thing also that I want to bring to your attention is I think that when people are searching for jobs, I think a lot of people get scared. They get scared that they're applying to too many places. They may get scared that their applications will get back to their current employer, which frankly almost never happens. That's just a kind of a code of conduct among other attorneys, because if they do that, then other people won't apply. So there's just so much that's going into what you need to do as an attorney to get a job. And you can never let your ego get involved. If you're losing, you just need to fight harder. You need to fight harder for your career, for your job. And then I'm telling you, I don't care who you are. If you went to law school and you got a law degree and then you passed the bar, you can get a job. And what does that mean? That means you do not need to work as a contract attorney. That means you do not need to be unemployed for a long time. It means so many things. And at the outset of this webinar, I just want to stress to you that you should never freaking give up. Like, you need to go all out, and it works. I used to have a business called Legal Authority, and I'm getting ready to launch another business that's similar to that called BCG Premier. And I'll put the URL for that after this call. But Legal Authority, what it would do is it would go into a city. And so say someone wanted to be a corporate attorney in Los Angeles, it would basically have a list of all the law firms that had corporate practices in Los Angeles, which might be 2,000. People would apply to all those, regardless of their qualifications, and they would get jobs. It worked. It worked very, very well. The business was stopped because it became very difficult to run for a lot of reasons, because it was very hard to keep all this data updated and a bunch of different things. But this method of applying to jobs, there's nothing like it. You need to apply to every possible place you can, and then you need to give yourself an edge. You need to do things like, you can mail your applications instead of emailing them. But the big thing is you can't get your ego involved, and you need to make sure that when you're applying to firms, you do everything you can, because, every day, all day, every day, day in and day out for 25 years, I look at people that apply to BCG. And, out of, 10 to 20,000, I don't know what the number is, of people that apply each year. It's actually 30,000, maybe the 30,000 people that apply to work for us each year. I would say that half of them are unemployed. And, you do not need to be unemployed. You do not need to work as a contract attorney. You do not need to go into another profession. You can get a job. And the reason you get a job is law firms are businesses. If they can make money hiring you, they will. And if they're not getting applications for whatever reason, they're small, they're large, and they don't have people in your practice or whatever, they will hire you. So you need to understand this, and you just cannot not conduct a major job search. I'm going to talk a lot today about the reason that people don't get interviews and those reasons, but overall, people are not getting interviews because they're just not applying to enough places. Now, I'm going to tell you how to overcome the obstacles that you'll experience. But, at the outset, I just want to make clear to you, you cannot freaking give up. You are a champion, and you need to push through, and you need to realize that your ability to get a job is no different than your ability to represent a client. And if you represent a client, you need to go all in and do everything you can to help that client. And you can do the same thing with you searching for jobs. So this is a live webinar. So what that means is, I will give this presentation. I will try to, give you as much detail as possible. I highly recommend that you stay for the whole thing, because it could change your life. And most people do. You're on this webinar with thousands of other people that watch, and you'll watch it. And so, this is a topic that people really want to know about. And so you should, give this all you got, and just watch this webinar, take notes, do everything you can to learn about what I'm going to talk about today, because this information is priceless. It's stuff that, very few people, if any, know in the world. Bragging, there's not a lot of people that have been doing this business at the level I've been doing it for so long. So after the webinar presentation, I will take a short break for everyone for 2 to 3 minutes. And then when I come back, I will answer questions about this webinar and any other questions you have about what I'm talking about. If you have questions while you're watching the webinar, you should put them in the chat, and I will answer them after the webinar is complete. And we will go as long as it takes to answer all the questions that you have. Okay, so what you're going to learn today is I'm going to talk about the top 12 reasons attorneys and law students, tend to have problems getting interviews with law firms. I'm going to show you why you're not getting interviews. And then I'm also going to show you, how I would overcome those if I was working on your behalf as a recruiter, but also what you can do for yourself if you're applying to firms. So you can kind of use the wisdom that I've accumulated to show you how to do that. As I said earlier, the most common mistake that attorneys make when they're looking for jobs is giving up. They give up because they're not confident. Their ego gets damaged. They feel like, they can't, they can't go on. They need to find, they need to accept something or do something else. And this is what happens all the time. And when attorneys are looking for jobs, like I said earlier, I mean, they give up. They just don't, they don't do it. I mean, they're not applying to enough places, and this is very sad. I watched a documentary recently. It wasn't last night, but it was kind of fun. It was, I don't know, like an hour long or 2 hour long documentary. And it was about all these men who travel to Russia. They go there to find brides because for whatever reason, they don't like attorneys. They don't like, women in the United States, or women aren't interested in them for whatever reason. And, so I watched this, and it was, all these men, a lot of them were in their 60s or even older. They were things like factory workers from the Midwest, and, they would meet and, marry a very attractive 19-year-old girls, and then, not always that young, but they would meet them, mixers and things, and they were prearranged. And, as I watched this, I came to the conclusion, by watching these men just find all these women, that if you look hard enough and you put enough effort into something, you have the ability to find something. I mean, I certainly, wouldn't be interested in doing that just for the language barrier and all sorts of things. But these men would find wives when they couldn't do so, in the United States. So you need to realize that you can get anything you want if you look hard enough. And, again, every attorney is employable. It doesn't matter what practice area you're in. It doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't even matter where you're located in the country. It doesn't matter how old or young you are. I work with attorneys that are in their 70s that don't have any business. And I get them interviews because I look hard, and 500, 1,000 firms, and, and they can get interviews. There's always people that are interested in certain types of attorneys from different practice areas. Whatever limitations you believe are holding you back, you may think, oh, I'm this, I can't get a job, or I'm this, and I can't get a job. It doesn't really matter what sort of limitations you think you may have. You can always get a position if you look hard enough. And again, it doesn't matter who you are. If you have a criminal record or something horrible that happened to you that you did that people find when they search for your name, it's going to be very difficult for you to find a job. But barring that, you'll get a job, and you should never get discouraged. You should never be just stop looking or giving up. And, right now, the legal market, actually, people don't realize this, but the labor numbers just came out, and it's showing that there was a lot less hiring than people predicted. On my end, I'm seeing a major slowdown from firms. So that slowdown is, affecting, a lot of people in the legal market. People are having a harder time getting jobs and getting very discouraged, and often thinking that they should be doing other careers. And it's not easy being rejected. When I receive rejection notices from law firms about my candidates, I'm often just, I take it personally, but I shouldn't. And you need to realize that, if you apply to 20 firms or 30 firms and get one interview, I mean, often that's very, very good. There's just so many reasons that attorneys don't get jobs. And, the legal profession is not welcoming to attorneys. There's a lot of rejection. The rejection, in addition to the reasons I'm talking about today, a lot of it's economic. Firms are scared. They don't want to hire people. But, so it's impossible kind of to categorize all the reasons. I'm not going to talk about the economy today, but, you really don't need to be overly concerned with this stuff. You can't please everyone. Not everyone is going to buy into your, whatever you're marketing. And it's okay. And, and if you don't get an interview, you should never feel badly. You shouldn't take it personally. I mean, I see attorneys all the time that, may have gone to a not great law school, and, I get a list of the firms that they applied to before they came to BCG, and it's all big firms, and they feel like they're failing. And you're certainly not failing if you don't get interviews with every firm you apply to. And, in a lot of cases, if a law firm has an opening, I mean, they're taking that opening and they're putting it on LinkedIn, they're putting it on Indeed, they're putting it on Law Crossing, they're doing all these things to promote the opening, and they're getting a lot of applications. They even oftentimes have the attorneys in their own firm trying to find people by recruiting people. So, if they get 300 applications, sometimes they'll only interview 2 or 3 of those people. And so these are not the best odds, no matter what your qualifications are. And so I'm going to talk about right now sort of the first reason that attorneys don't get interviews. And this one should be fairly obvious, but, firms, if you apply to the firm and they have an opening, they probably just have an interview, they probably have better applicants for the position. So obviously, they're going to hire the best applicant. And, you may not be the best applicant. And, it's the same thing with anything like dating. Like, you may not, every person you're interested in isn't going to be necessarily interested in you, like going to Russia, like I told you. And so, in most cases, when you apply to jobs, there's just going to be people with better qualifications or, a better background, and more stability, or more focus on the practice area they're hiring for. So, these things you can't control. And people may be formed from more prestigious law firms. They may be from better schools, may have better experience. They may want someone who's more junior, more senior. I mean, you just don't know. So you shouldn't worry about it. I mean, who cares? I mean, they're a business. They're just trying to hire the best person that they can. And, so it's not a big deal. You shouldn't care. Like, why care? Like, why care? You think you're a perfect fit for a job. Why care if there's a better applicant? So here's what I do as a recruiter to make people stand out. I'm not going to rip on other recruiters here, but a lot of times when you go to a recruiter, they only can help you with the most well-publicized openings from the largest firms. So you'll get rejected there. Many attorneys will apply to 20, 30 recruiters. I mean, it's very rare, but I mean, they'll apply to a couple of recruiters and the recruiters will tell them to pound sand. And so a lot of these attorneys will give up on their job searches. And you should never give up when you're not getting interviews. That's just crazy. And so many times when a recruiter properly markets you to a large range of firms, they can get you interviews. And I've gotten placed all sorts of people. I've placed attorneys that you would never think could get a job. I've placed it doesn't matter. I mean, if you applied enough places. So the biggest thing that I do that works the best is I will, instead of you just applying to positions on LinkedIn and Indeed and Law Crossing and things, what I will do as a recruiter is I will promote you to law firms that may not have openings, but are likely to be interested in someone with your background. I mean, if you apply to a place without openings, then you're the only applicant, and the law firm, is flattered that you're applying. Like people don't apply. I had in Malibu, California, where I live and work, at one time I had a law firm that would represent our company in various disputes. And as part of that, work, we would, obviously be found on the internet when people search for law firms in Malibu. And we talked about how we did litigation. And in the 7 or 8 years, 10 years that I had the law firm, I only had 2 people just come in and, or send me their resume. That's it, 2 people. And one of them I hired. So I was flattered. And, I'm a recruiter. I could have hired anyone. The person I hired was in Malibu, and Malibu is kind of a hard commute for people. But think about that. I mean, only 2 people ever reached out and searched for, litigation firms in Malibu. All over Los Angeles, they could have searched. They could have people that were in different parts of Los Angeles could have searched for law firms in Malibu, but they didn't. And so they just probably searched for jobs in Los Angeles or, whatever, cities, big cities in Los Angeles. They never searched for small markets. And Malibu is not that small market. I mean, it's a half hour or 20 minutes from kind of big population centers, but no one ever did that. So, at our company, and it's actually more than a decade, it's more like 25 years, we've been monitoring law firms. And so we watch law firms that have openings and then we continually close those openings and open new ones. And so, we've been doing that for so long that we really have a good idea of firms that are kind of hiring on an ongoing basis. And there are firms, thousands of them, that will continually have openings every 6 months, every 2 years for certain types of attorneys. And so when we send them to them, they get jobs. And the best legal recruiters can use that information in combination with your outside interest and personality to match you with the most appropriate firms, and it works. And the service I was talking about earlier, BCG Premier, is something that we'll be offering very shortly to help you apply on your own to those firms and to tell you where you should be applying. And it's, very powerful information that I think, if it's something you're interested in, where we haven't launched yet, but I'll put a link to it in the chat later when I take a break. But, law firms also have certain personality types that they hire from. You never know. There's law firms that are extremely liberal, that if you have those sorts of interests and you're supporting, far left candidates are interested in them or whatever, and will be interested in you. The same thing goes with conservatives, and other law firms are composed of people that were former college athletes. It's just, I mean, you look at the firm roster and it's all these people who are college athletes. I mean, there's law firms that will just hire certain types of people and you just never know. I was talking to a recruiter last night, and in, 2001, 2002, or maybe, yeah, or late 2000, there was the market for corporate attorneys was just gone. Like, because of the dot-com boom, there'd been so much over hiring. And I remember there was this one opening, it was at Morrison and Foerster in Denver, and the law firm was receiving hundreds, if not 1,000+ applications for it. And one guy applied, and it said on his resume that he'd been a professional snowboarder. And the partner that saw that was like, this is the guy I want. And you never would have imagined, he didn't have the best qualifications for the job, but he's the one that was hired. So things like this happen all the time, and you just never know. So sometimes it's just luck, and then what recruiters do, and I can tell you how to do it, but a good recruiter like BCG will have access to every opening in the market, and not just at the low-hanging, obvious law firms that everyone else is applying to. And so, so I'm saying we do that at BCG, but how do you do that on your own? You should look at, not just, Indeed and LinkedIn. You can use Law Crossing. You can use Law Crossing. We'll find jobs from, employer websites, and we put them on there, and things that aren't getting advertised. And you can use that site, which works very well. But the other thing, and Law Crossing also has archive jobs, which are jobs that were in firms in the past. And so those jobs will, also, be things that, you can get as well. So, by applying to those. And the other thing that's important is when you're applying to jobs, you want to make sure that when you're looking for jobs that you're applying to, every firm you can find. So if you're interested in finding a job, let's say you wanted to work in, I don't know, Omaha, Nebraska, I'm just giving that as an example, you would go and research the websites of all the law firms in Omaha, Nebraska that do the type of work you do. You could apply to ones without openings, but you will also find lots of firms with openings on their website, which could be extremely helpful to you. And, a lot of recruiting firms, for example, are lifestyle recruiting firms where people kind of work their own hours and that sort of thing and aren't really committed. And I'm not saying that recruiters are bad, but what I am saying is that you should not do your search like a lifestyle type of search. You should be doing your search as a person that wants to is doing things full time and is not taking this casually. You should also be applying to stand out and get better applicants and looking at markets outside of major cities. If you're applying to firms in major cities, there's just going to be a lot of competition for those jobs because there's more attorneys. There typically are way more attorneys in large cities than there are jobs. But when you start thinking outside the box and applying to jobs in smaller markets that other people aren't applying to, for example, Malibu is a small town of 7,000 or 8,000 permanent residents. If you apply to firms there, I mean, you'd have good luck if you're in LA. If you apply to firms in Palm Springs, if you're in LA, you would have better luck. If you apply to firms in Indio and other desert communities, I mean, you just apply to places that other people aren't. And it's the smartest freaking thing you can do. Every day, our company gets interviews for people that are in like a major market and decide, hey, I'm going to look at Lafayette, Indiana, and they decide, let's send them to firms there. Or they try all these different markets and are able to, get positions in those markets because there's no other applicants. Very, very smart. Something that's, maybe negative in your background is not, won't be taken as seriously in the other market where there's not a lot of applicants. And so, recruiters will often have exclusive jobs, meaning jobs that the employer, gives them that it's not given to other people. But, with respect to those jobs, really all you need to do is you need to, make sure that you're, trying to find those firms on your own. So recruiter's not going to give those to you, but there are exclusive jobs out there that firms have that are having a difficult time finding people. An interesting market right now is Texas. Like there's all these kind of smaller markets in Texas where they need like DUI attorneys, and insurance attorneys, and all this different stuff, and no one applies. I mean, they could be sitting there for 6 months and no one applies. And so, but they have openings and they're often exclusive to BCG, but if you apply them on your own, you can still get them. So, you really have to, do that. Other things that you can do, if you're not the best applicant, is you can humanize yourself. So instead of looking just like a normal person, you can, tell them why this firm's important to you, why you've always wanted to do this, or, you can try to humanize yourself. I mean, often one of the best ways of humanizing yourself is to somehow, make contact with people, not just via email, but other ways. I mean, so people see you as a person and not just an email. And, and so that, helps you, understanding your background, telling why, you're interested in a certain market or a certain position. I mean, all these things can make a huge difference and make you stand out to the other applicants. And, there's a lot of more things that a good recruiter will do for you, but, you just need to realize that one of the smartest things you can ever do is be the only applicant for a position. So just keep in mind that anytime a position is advertised, like on LinkedIn or Indeed, that firm, your odds of getting that position is very, very slim. Unless you're applying to firms maybe in smaller markets that other people are missing, which is also a smart strategy with those sites. Law Crossing is a good source of jobs because using that site, you can apply to firms from, that have jobs on their websites that no one else is finding, that sort of thing. But meeting the most likable applicant, humanizing yourself however you can, making contact with people and so forth is very important. Years ago, there was this organization that I wanted to join. It was called TED, and they had kind of like TED, and it's still around. They had like TED Light, which was, not that difficult. I mean, it was difficult, but not that difficult to get into. And then they had the real TED, like is where all the things happen. And I remember I was talking to someone there that was in charge of membership, and I was like, I applied there again at the time. I had business recruiting. I had other businesses that were much larger, and she said, they just, they only are going to, let people in that they know. You can't just apply. You have to, network and get to know people, and that's how things work. I mean, once people know who you are, you have a much better chance of getting a position. I knew an attorney I worked with at Quinn Emanuel, and he had a trial. He was doing, after law school, the only position he could get was doing insurance defense, which isn't, the most complex type of litigation, but he had a trial against an attorney from Quinn Emanuel. And during that trial, like they got to know each other, they went out to lunch, and that partner got to know his story, and he was humanized and was able to get hired by Quinn Emanuel when just sending an application would have been impossible. So, the more you can humanize yourself, the better you are, the more, you can find places that other people aren't applying to, the better off you are. Now, the next one is very important, and this is something that a lot of people miss, is you often apply too late for a job. So how that works essentially is, you should be monitoring every site you can every day for positions. And the reason for that is because, when you're applying to jobs, what happens is, the recruiting partners or the recruiting personnel, the secretary in charge of posting jobs will post a position. And what happens is they start getting a lot of applicants. And so they have a business need to hire someone because they're losing money without work being done. And so they get these first applications, and maybe they have 20 or 30 the first couple of days. And they're like, we need to get someone here now. And so they try to pick like the best 2 or 3 or whatever from those, and then they start interviewing those people, and they don't pay attention to the applicants that come later because they're already in the interview process. They're already meeting people and bonding with them, and they almost often feel a sense of disloyalty if they're bringing too many people in. But in addition, it's just a lot of administrative work. Like, who wants to have to keep reviewing 20, 30 resumes that come in, opening 20 or 30 emails each day? Like, who wants to do that? I mean, people just don't want to do that. And so if you apply to those firms on time, meaning you're one of the first applicants, you're going to have a much better chance. The other thing to know is that when people post jobs on different sites, like say someone's posting a job on LinkedIn, or say someone's posting a job on Indeed or Law Crossing, when people are posting jobs on those sites, what happens is, those jobs may be up for 30 days or 60 days. So a lot of times when you're applying to firms like that, you're just applying to things that were older and that aren't current jobs. And so you really want to apply, to firms right away. So even if you're the most qualified applicant, if you do not apply like the day or the day after that job becomes available, your odds of getting the position decrease dramatically. At BCG, what often happens is when candidates come into BCG, we send them openings right away, like if we're representing them. But because those openings are active but haven't been closed, but the law firms may already be interviewing people, you're going to have a difficult time getting those jobs because it's just there's just too many applicants that have already applied for those jobs. So the law firms are often already interviewing. So when you start getting jobs is when you've been doing your search for a month, several weeks, because you're applying to new jobs and the best applicant, and we're getting you out to those firms immediately. So, it's just how that kind of works. Once a law firm's interviewing people, they're already bonding with them, they're connecting with them, and they just don't feel like, talking to other people at that point. They want to make a decision from the people that they have, and then they'll justify hiring the best person they can from those resumes. So again, you should not feel bad if you got on a site and you're starting your job search today and you apply to 50 firms that have openings, you don't get interviews. So the only reason why is because that job is probably already, gotten interviews, and it costs money. Think about it. Like, so they have to pay someone to review the resumes. They have to pay someone to contact the candidates. They have to pay, hourly money that could be coming into the firm through interviewing candidates. And it's a big investment. I mean, there's nothing that they can do. And because of that, they're often, they don't want to spend the extra time and money. They just don't want to do it. And so, they don't enjoy interviewing. They bring people in and talk to them, but it's taking up time that they could be billing or, working on deals and motions and making their billable hour targets. And they, want to have billable hours as opposed to other types of hours. So there's really often not much you can do. You could be the best applicant, and you never should feel badly if you don't get the position. It's just nothing within your control. So what BCG does is, we 7 days a week, we're trying to get openings for people. We're, using a lot of people and technology to get those openings as quickly as possible as we can from law firms. And then we're helping you apply to those immediately. Law Crossing is a good way to find jobs because Law Crossing will, make it, we'll be able to get you jobs very, very quickly if by putting jobs up there the second they come out. But, the second the recruiter gets an opening, they'll start emailing and advising candidates the position, following up about the opening, trying to get people in there. And again, this is something that you can do yourself. You just have to monitor the market, and you have to look at what's going on every single day, and you have to apply to places when they have openings immediately. You cannot afford not to. You have to do it immediately. And it's just incredibly important. This is not casual. It's not like you can see an opening and say, maybe I'll apply in a couple of days. You have to apply right away because if you don't, you're just going to not get the job often if you don't do it. So you need to be intense. You need to, do whatever you can. If there's law firms you like, positions on their site, you should be contacting them. You should do whatever you can to apply right away. It's extremely important. I just can't emphasize it enough. So, getting your applications out as soon as firms have things, checking your job alerts and emails each day, making sure you're doing whatever you possibly can to get jobs is just vitally important. So the next thing is, your law school. So there are lots of law firms, many, 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 that will only hire people from law schools of a certain ranking. They will do that often no matter how senior you are. They pride themselves on having applicants that come from a certain law schools, and there's nothing you can do to change that. You should not feel badly. I mean, who cares? I mean, ultimately, the law school you went to, a lot of times the people that are the worst students at the worst law schools have the most successful careers. I see it all the time in personal injury, for example, like as people actually own their own planes. I mean, it's just crazy. So you do the best with what you have, and you will find someone to hire you, or you can often start your own firm. I've seen people start incredibly successful firms and things like trust and estates where they never, could have imagined they would get a job. And it's just all these sorts of things. And sometimes it's your ranking in the law school. Like it's not as important when you get senior, but if you're a junior attorney and, say you're in Detroit and you went to Wayne State University Law School, and you're applying to, certain types of firms in Detroit, they're going to look at your ranking when you're a law student. And they may do that every first year because that's the only way they have to judge you compared to other applicants from that law school. So, the law school you attended or the grades you got, you just can't change it. So, other law firms, they just, the reason they want them to have gone to good law schools is because it looks better in the eyes of their clients. The attorneys that are looking for jobs often want to be with those types of firms but they have good law schools. I mean, it's crazy. Like attorneys talk about their law schools like their entire career. I had a woman working for me once that was in her sixties and kept talking about how, great it was that she went to this law school. And it's just, who cares? I mean, but if you don't need to apply to places that won't have you and feel badly because of where you went to law school, how you did, there's nothing you can change. And people go to different law schools for different reasons. Sometimes they go to law schools that aren't that great because they got a scholarship. Other times they go to law schools that aren't that great because they want to be close to home. Other times a lot of attorneys go to law schools that aren't that great because they didn't, do well enough on standardized tests. I was talking to a woman that's a senior in high school recently, and she had taken the SATs and gotten some horrible score, like 1,080 or something. I mean, which again, it's not, I guess, horrible. You may have gotten that in your SATs. I'm not trying to say anything negative about you, but then she took all these like AP courses, like these very hard AP courses, and got fours and fives on them, like in and calculus and like all these things. So sometimes just you don't do well in standardized tests. You may be smart enough, but you just don't do well enough on them. And the clients often assume that if the law firm is able to attract people from good law schools, they may be smarter than attorneys at good law schools. But they believe that if you have done really well in the SAT and gone to a good law school and been able to get into that based on your college grades, you're smarter. And there may be some truth to that. I mean, who cares? I mean, you may be not as smart as some people, so you don't have to practice in that practice area, those types of firms. I mean, smartness just means the ability to figure out problems and come up with solutions, but in certain practice areas, that's not as important. So I'm not saying anything negative about you if you did poorly, but you have to go where people are interested in you instead of trying to fit into some place where you may not. Why are good law schools important to law firms? Well, in order to get into a good law school, you often have to, do extremely well in college, which means often that you had to work very, very hard. But to get in there, then you have to be able to do really well in there. Then you have to be able to get good rejections. I mean, all this stuff is very important to being a good attorney. So you may get, you prefer certain law firms. And so certain law firms will reject you because of that. Law firms will often hire you regardless of your law school. When you look like an expert in your practice area, when you look very committed, like you look like you're moving up. And so, you just need to look like someone who's the best fit for that law firm in their practice area. And I've seen people, bad law schools at all stages of their career after, there's no law school that's bad. I mean, first of all, everyone learns the same thing in every law school. The only real benefit a law school provides you, and there are some major benefits, is it's not the material that you learn, it's not necessarily the professors, it's just you're the networking. You're around people that have very, very high expectations for themselves, so you try to rise at that level. There's just and then so it can help you, but how do you get out of that? Like you make sure that you're very, very good and you're very focused on a certain practice area. You look like you're focused on paper, and because of that focus, law firms will hire people that have more focus than non-focus. So a lot of times someone could have gone to a great law school. I see this all the time with people that went to Yale and stuff, and they're just doing all this other stuff besides working in a law firm, and law firms will hire people from much lesser law schools that are focused. Oftentimes, the people from the lowest ranked law schools that get the best jobs are in practice areas like risk, which not a lot of people do. Oftentimes, patent prosecutors will be able to get jobs regardless of their law school because they're being hired for their expertise in science that they gathered before law school, or math or computer science, and they're being hired for that. And oftentimes, patent attorneys, because they don't get the best grades, and they often don't go to the best law schools because they're kind of in these scientific disciplines with all these curves that make their grades, much lower than someone that might have majored in like sociology or psychology or something and got into a good law school. So they don't get into the best law schools when they come out of law school, but then they are able to move up once they get that experience. So, it's, also difficult for attorneys often to get jobs in litigation, like commercial litigation in large law firms, because there's just a lot of people that do it. So my advice to you, if you didn't go to a good law school, is to really take your resume and make yourself look focused. Like, so what do you do? Like, if you're listing your experience at a firm, let's say, you do a little bit of corporate work, a little bit of, trademark work, and then a lot of, commercial litigation. Well, you take your resume and you make it look like you're just a freaking awesome commercial litigator, and you highlight all that, and you take out the stuff about all these other things that have nothing to do with your focus. So, people from law schools that aren't that good, if they focus on a practice area, they will always be hireable. I can't stress to you enough the importance of this. So what does that mean? That means if you come out of a lesser ranked law school and you focus on a practice area, very few people really maintain that focus, and their resume doesn't have that focus. And I can't, emphasize this enough. So you put a bunch of different things on your resume. You say, I did this and I did that and I did this, and it makes it look like there's no focus. And then you may do stuff like you may have been in 4 different, clubs or associations during law school. And one of them might be like entertainment law, and the other might be corporate law or something. And you put that on your resume, even though you're proud of those associations, but it doesn't have anything to do with your current practice area. Or you list all of your past experiences in law firms, and those past experiences don't have anything to do with your practice area either. So, if you're at a current law firm and you've been doing corporate work for the past 3 years, and then your previous 2 firms are doing litigation, you shouldn't say anything about litigation. You just say you're an associate at those firms. You don't want to brag about things that have nothing to do with what you're currently doing. It's insane. So, if you, do your search right, and you focus on a practice area, then that's what law firms need. So say a law firm has a need I saw this recently, for a tax attorney to work trust and estates matters for the law firm. Very interesting kind of profile of someone. So if a law firm has, needs someone with trust and estates experience, the best thing that they can possibly do is, or tax, trust, and estates experience, is make their resume all about that. And I saw someone hired recently that did that and got an incredible job. They were making like, I don't know, $110,000 working for an accounting firm, and were able to get a job paying like $220,000 at a much more prestigious firm, because they had that focus, and they kept that focus on the resume. They didn't have all this crap about other things that they've done. They just did one thing, and that makes you so strong, and then the other ththing, with your applications where you have that focus, is you just apply to as many places as you can without opening. So, I can't tell you enough, and I'll stress this to you with everything that I got. Take your resume, make it look like you do nothing but one practice area. If you've been doing other practice areas in the past, just say you're an associate or whatever at those firms. Don't list all your experience. Don't have a lot of crap about jobs you had before law school that have nothing to do with what you're currently doing. You may be proud of those jobs, but all you have to say is that this was work you were doing before law school, and leave it at that. I mean, that's it. So, you don't want to do anything but have a focus on your current experience. I mean, and things that are related to, your practice area. And oftentimes, this is something that people don't realize. You won't get hired because you went to a law school that's too good. So if a law firm has people that all went to, kind of middle ranked law schools or whatever, and or not great law schools, and you apply there, you won't get interviewed, because they will think that you will come there and think that the salary is not enough and leave. They'll think that you may come there and you'll feel entitled to get better work, or you'll feel like you're superior to the attorneys there. It happens very, very often with people that went to law school that aren't that great. They feel that if you're hired because the market's slow, that you'll be likely to leave when the market picks up, or you'll just be looking for a job the entire time you're there. You'll also undermine the people that are working there, because when people see you leave, it kind of sends a bad message to the attorneys that are currently there. So they don't like that. So, in terms of graduates of top law schools, when you're applying to firms, I mean, it's difficult, because even if the job market's slow, you're going to have a difficult time of getting firms to look at you that aren't as prestigious or as strong as where you are right now. So, law schools, will, often, the people that come out of there just won't have the staying power for some law firms. And, if you apply, again, to firms that aren't as good, they'll know you're likely to leave. And, so people are going to feel comfortable with people that are from, prestigious law schools, and people from average law schools aren't going to feel comfortable around those from average firms. I had something interesting happen. My father, years ago, I was in high school, and, very, playing athletics, vice president of student council, getting good grades, very motivated, just doing very, very well. And, at the time, just finished dating the homecoming queen of my woman. And I met this, and I probably shouldn't even be giving this example, but I'm going to give it anyway. I met this woman that was my age. She was a friend of my stepsister, and she had a very difficult life. She had, parents died, she adopted, she had a lot of problems. She dropped out of high school at the age of 15. And anyway, but I got interested in her. And my dad said, this isn't going to work out because, she's just going to not be comfortable with you because of all the things that you're doing and who she is. And I don't know if that was a wrong thing for him to say, but essentially what he was saying is that, when you are very talented or you have certain things in your background and then you're associating the interest, with people that are going to be like intimidated or not comfortable with your background, they're not going to be interested in you. And that's what happens with law firms. So, when people have really, really good qualifications and they become interested in a smaller firm or a firm that's not as good, things just don't work out. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of what happens. And so you need to kind of be aware of, if you went to a really good law school, that the other firms of a different caliber often may not be interested. But there's when attorneys are in law school, when they go to really good law schools, I don't know my law schools rank these days, but I went to Virginia, and I remember all of people there were believed that they were entitled to make these huge salaries and get these jobs with the best firms. And then even myself, when they would believe that they're better than these smaller firms, and so law firms will pick up on that, and it can hurt you. Make it difficult because you will go into some place and you believe that you're with special treatment, you're better. I even remember, and I'm not proud of myself, but when I started, I clerked for a judge, and he didn't go as good of a law school as I did. And there was a co-clerk as good of a law school as I did. And then there was there were other clerks working for the magistrates and the bankruptcy attorney. They didn't go as good of a law school as I did. And I always felt like I was going places. I was going to work at big firms, and they never were. And it's just, that's not cool. I mean, it probably didn't make them feel too good about themselves. And I had an attitude, and yeah. So, and even when I started at my first firm, Quinn Emanuel, I remember there was a woman there, and Quinn Emanuel was very small when I joined. It was like 45 attorneys, but there was a woman there that had gone to Yale Law School, and that was a big deal to them. And even she was like, I'm not staying unless you guarantee I'm a partner in 3 years. And I think that they, at that time, a smaller firm, I think that, I don't know what happened, but I think that they may have, agreed to that, but I'm not going to say they did because I'm 100% positive. And so, attorneys from the best law schools will think that they're entitled to the best work. They're expected, they shouldn't have to work as hard because they're great, and they're entitled. And I see this all the time with people that go to great law schools and then they go to firms and they're disappointed because they think they're special and deserve more. So, a lot of times, law schools get in trouble very early in their career because they just think they're better than people, and they have this attitude, and it doesn't matter in a law firm. Law firms are businesses, and if you're not behaving properly, they'll get rid of you. So a good recruiter will make it look like you're eager to work in a smaller firm, like you can get business, like you think you can work on the types of clients you are, they want to work on, and so you have to appear humble and like this is the type of firm you want to work in, and you need to talk about things that are interested in the firm. You can humanize them sometimes and make it look like they don't think you're superior, by maybe talking about different struggles you faced earlier in your life. We do that with candidates a lot, highlighting things that make it seem like you're approachable. But also when you're went to a good law school, you will find, if you do a search in the market, you can search for firms on Google, you can search for firms on different things. But you will find when you search for firms in the market that you will often, be able to, find firms that are, interested in you, despite the fact that, you went to a good law school, you're finding the places. I mean, you'll find firms that have, they're small firms of like 3 people, 10 people, that you'll never find on lists, but you'll find if you search Google for firms. Now, this is a big one that for law firms, often, they'll look at your resume and they'll see like a lot of movement, and it just looks like you're likely to move. It's not a good idea to job hop. I mean, you need to take every job or move that you make seriously and think like you're going to stay there for the long term, because what happens is, if your resume looks like you're going to be moving because you move a lot, other law firms will conclude the same thing's going to happen. I look at resumes all the time. I was like, move 1 year, move 2 years, move 3 years.
all this movement. And why would someone take the risk of hiring you if you look like you're going to move again? It doesn't make any sense. And it's not something that, you want to look like. So you have to be very, very careful. So every move on your resume is something that, that makes it look like you move again. So, if you look like you'll move, then what happens is law firms will assume that you'll go there, they'll give you work to do. You will start doing work for clients. Clients will know who you are. And then after, after some time, they will conclude that, you're going to move. And then that hurts their reputation, work with their clients. It undermines, it makes it difficult because they have to take time hiring someone new again. It, has all these negative repercussions for the firm that are going to, that don't look good. So law firms have to be very, very careful. It's a lot of work hiring new people. It's a lot of expense when there's downtime and work's not getting done while they're hiring new people. It undermines their people there. And law firms want you to look like you're going to stay. And it's very basic. I mean, if you had someone that you were hiring to take care of your children as a nanny, and you saw that they switched jobs every 3 months, you would conclude that that person would probably be a risky hire. And law firms are the same way. Like they will think that if you look like you're going to move because you've moved so much in the past, that you're going to move again. And it's just not good. The other thing about attorneys when they're moving a lot, and I'll just, kind of tell you a couple of things of how that works. Like sometimes an attorney will get to a firm and, maybe the firm isn't treating them the way they want. Maybe they're getting their work's being critiqued too much, and so they just kind of get into this mode where they check out, they're working, but they're not really in it. And they're just looking for another job. And at that point, the work's not as good, the commitment's not as good, the hours aren't as high. So that's kind of the process. So someone will get a firm like 6 months and they'll start thinking that they need to look someplace else. And then they'll go to they'll kind of check out. That's one thing that happens. But the biggest thing that movement shows most of the time is that what the law firm will conclude is a law firm will often conclude that you've moved so much because you get to a firm and you don't do good work and the firm asks you to leave, right? So that's not good either. Like, you don't want to look like someone who's going to be asked to leave when you go to a new firm. I mean, because that means you're not doing good work. There's no rating agency, like formal ones for attorneys. I mean, there may be Martindale things where people can submit their favorite attorneys in different areas, or paid advertisements and legal publications like the LA Times, the best attorneys in LA. And when you see those, often it's not even the attorneys for the biggest firms, it's the people that are paid to advertise there. So there's really no rating agency for attorneys. The only rating is how long you can go to a firm and stay there, and how committed you look, and how you're focused on a practice area. So it's very important to try to stay, at a firm if you can. Now, again, I make my living moving people from firm to firm, but you have to realize that the only way that you're going to be able to get a position is if you're able to, be stable at a firm and not continually leave. Very, very important. So again, like I already said this earlier, but if you leave, it doesn't look good to the clients. Clients think, what's wrong with this law firm? But they keep putting different people. Again, it's a lot of money for the firm to spend if you're going to leave. So, it's a better investment to hire someone who's going to bill, I'm just saying hypothetically, 1,500 hours a year for 4 years than it is to hire someone who's going to bill 1,500 hours a year for 2 years. And then because at the end of those 2 years, they're going to have all this downtime with finding someone new, and it's going to be bad to the clients and bad to the other attorneys there. And so, it also, like I said, it hurts the morale. So every time someone is leaving the law firm, the morale of the existing attorneys there is low. They think, well, if this person's leaving, maybe I should be leaving too, and they're going to do a better job. And and the attorneys need to be replaced. And think about all the administrative work. They need to post ads, they need to wait for the best applicants, they need to interview people, they need to make offers. Not all offers are accepted. It's just a nightmare. So, it's just, bad. And if someone's predisposed to leave, like they're already checked out and they're looking for a new job, they may work at home a couple days a week when they're supposed to be in the office, and they may turn down assignments. They may just be very difficult to work with because they're checked out, and law firms know that happens, when people leave. So law firms need people that are committed. They need people to avoid people that are likely to leave, and they want people that are going to kind of mesh with the firm there and stay. I mean, law firms, the best law firms, like the highest paying, like the AmLaw 100 law firms and so forth, they literally they want you to start as a summer associate, and they want you to work like hell, for 8 or 10 or 12 years with a prospect of making partner. is you have that because they know, they're going to favor people that stay the longest. They're going to, they're going to want all these things. And so if you're able to do that, it can help you quite a bit. And, a lot of times, like I said earlier, when people are leaving law firms, a good proportion of the time, like I would say at least 50% of the time they're leaving because their work's not good, or if they're not able to get along with others, or they're not working hard enough, or, and so they're asked to leave. I had an instance recently where I was working with a guy that had gone to Columbia Law School, and he had started his first job and been there like 18 months. The firm wasn't like the best firm. It was like, it's not the kind of firm you would expect someone from Columbia Law School to go to. But I started working with him, and this one law firm wanted to hire him. And then I asked the firm if they would, the firm that wanted to hire him was a small law firm, wanted to check his references, and they checked his references, and people were just like, his work quality wasn't good, his commitment wasn't good, like all these sorts of things. And that's why he was unemployed. I had another candidate who was very, very strong. He'd gone to, where did he go? Went to University of North Carolina Law School. He did very well. And he got a job with a major firm, and they asked him to leave after being there for a year and a half or something. And they just said, you don't have the drive and the commitment and the ability to search out work and all these things that we need of our associates. So they asked him to leave. And this is what happens all the time. It happens with attorneys in big firms. That happens with attorneys in small law firms. So if you don't look like the strongest attorney on paper, the law firm isn't going to be interested in you. Law firms want people that are going to stay there. And a lot of times, attorneys will leave regardless of what the law firm is like. People will often, they're just a certain type of person. I was at a business networking group recently, and this guy there was talking about how, he's just a bad person. Like, he will get involved with women. He will make them feel like they're the only person that he's interested in. He will flatter them and be nice to them, but he just cannot stop having other women side. He just can't stop it. That's how he is. He certainly doesn't portray himself like that to women, but that's what he is. He's someone that is always going to, cheat. And some people are like that. Some people just, have certain qualities. They're always going to leave the firm they're at. They're always going to, regardless of where they go, that's what they're going to do. And that's just how some people are. They just will always leave, or they won't be there. So again, for law firms, they want stability. You would want stability too if you were hiring someone. If you're moving a lot, you need to realize that every move you make will not look good, and law firms won't be interested in you. I remember when I was at my first law firm, Quinn Emanuel, I used to get calls from recruiters weekly. I don't know if it was every other day, but at least once a week, I would get a call from a recruiter. And they just would keep calling and calling and calling. And that was the only firm I'd ever been at. Then I moved to my second firm, and I was there for over a year, didn't receive a call from the recruiter. And the reason I didn't receive a call is because they didn't want someone that had been at their first firm a year and the next firm a year. They knew that that was not a good person to call, because that would be very hard to place someone that had been at each firm 1 year. So I didn't get calls anymore, so it's too much trouble for law firms to hire people that are likely to leave. So a good recruiter, and this is what you can do yourself. They can frame you as someone that may not have found the perfect home. So what does that mean? That means that you might say you're interested in working for, large public companies as a corporate attorney. And you start out at your first job and you're working for kind of mom and pop companies at a firm. And then you move to like maybe a mid-sized firm, and you're working for companies that are a little bit bigger. And then you're able to, say with each move, like, I wanted to move to a firm where I could work on larger companies and do more sophisticated transactions. Attorneys can do that as litigators. You can do it any practice area you're in. You can say, I'm moving because I want to get more focus, or I want to do something like that. And you frame each move that way, and that, can help you. Or you want to be with people that are like you, like some certain background, like you want to, work in a family-oriented firm. I don't know what it is, but if there's reasons for each move, that can be good. So the biggest one is, not being able to do the work you want. So if your resume shows some sort of focus and something, and you're moving for reasons like that, that can be good. So what does that mean? That means, you start out, like I said, with a smaller firm, with your bigger firm, the bigger firm, you're more sophisticated clients. That people like that. People like people that are improving. Or you're at a large firm and you move to a smaller firm because you want to have the opportunity to develop clients. Maybe, it's difficult to develop clients at that smaller firm, so you move to another smaller firm or whatever. You can frame things that way. Sometimes law firms that you're at will have all sorts of financial and other problems. So, you may move because of that. Law firms can collapse. The other big one is needing to be in a new geographic area. So one of the easiest moves that you can ever do, and one of the easiest ways to get hired, is if you try to relocate to a market where your parents are, or where your spouse is from, or where you're from, or you want to be closer to family or something like that. Law firms, you could have had two moves in 3 years or something, and then decide you want to move home. And law firms will believe that if you move back to this new geographic area, you're going to be more stable, and because you're closer to family or whatever. That's one way to move. So there's a whole science of this, but most of the time when you move, you need to look like you're doing whatever you can to advance. You need to look special. You need to have, your current employers, you need to make sure that they understand that whatever your reasons for moving were related to something that are related to your goals, and that this new law firm will enable you to satisfy those goals. And this is a very common, moving to smaller firms that are more boutique-y, where maybe you get more responsibility. There's just all sorts of reasons that you can give. So, you have to be able to frame each move as a move up or closer to your goals than you may have done at your current firm. So say like you're at a firm and you want to do entertainment law, and you're only getting little bit of work doing entertainment law, then you move to another firm where you can get more work doing entertainment law, but then their work peters out. So you want to move to a firm that only does entertainment law. Those sorts of moves can work, and they're explainable and very, very positive. So, another reason I talked about this earlier, but your grades, may not be good enough. It's like a really good firm like Gibson Dunn, they will, you could be Secretary of State and try to work there, but they're still going to look at your law school grades and those look like. And, some law firms will only accept people at certain rankings. So like Latham & Watkins is a great law firm. If you went to certain law schools, they'll have grade cutoffs, even for the largest. And even if you went to lesser law schools that aren't highly ranked, if you're first in your class or second or something, you're going to look for them. So, but they have grade cutoffs often for each school. Now, this is what I'm talking about with Latham is something I remember from 20 years ago. I'm not sure that they're still doing that. But that's kind of an example. So, so oftentimes this is the stupidest thing that people do, and you may do this too. People will put stuff on their resume that will say like, top 40% of my class, or whatever, like just something that's not really that great. But they'll say, I got an A in these 3 courses. So, but that means you didn't get A's in the other courses. So you never want to put something on your resume if you're not at the top of your class or didn't distinguish yourself. You should never say something about your grades on your resume. You go, why would you? It's not gonna help you. So you leave your grades off your resume. Why do now if you were like in the top 10%, or you've got some award for your grades or something, you can put those on your resume, but don't put things on your resume unless it makes you look really, really strong. People will often put that they got a 2.5 grade average on their resume, or they'll say that they got a 3.2 and that the top half of the class is 3.25. They'll literally put this on their resume. I see this every day. I don't know why you would do that. You never want to highlight grades that aren't anything but awesome. Why would you do that? You should never, you're an attorney representing a client would never draw attention to their mediocrity or their anything less than something that's really going to convince a judge or jury about what's strong. Law firms want to feel like they're hiring the best people, not even if they're not. I've seen law firms. I saw one woman, she went to University of Minnesota Law School. I've said this example before, webinars, but she went to University of Minnesota Law School. Her performance there was horrible. Like she literally had C's and D's. She got a job with a federal appellate judge, like a very well-known one. I have no idea how she got it. The judge obviously just didn't check her grades, and she got this clerkship. Then when the clerkship was ending, we were representing her. We got her a job at one of the top firms, like one of the top 5 firms in Silicon Valley, and they never reviewed her grades, ever. Like they just didn't review, and they hired her. And of course she got there and her performance wasn't up to par. So like after a year, they asked her to leave. And then she went and got a job at, one of the top, like probably 10 or 15 best law firms doing litigation in Los Angeles. And they didn't check her grades. But, if she had drawn any attention to that, she would never have been hired. Her career would have never, she never would have made as much money and, been able to stay in large law firms as long. So you just never want to emphasize things that don't make you look that strong. So, people have poor grades, then, you just need to make them look really, really good in their practice area. If the law firm's going to ask for those grades. Now, grades, by the way, are really, and I said this earlier, are really only that important for junior attorneys, like, because that's all the law firms have to judge you on. But when you get more senior and you've been doing something for several years, like, it's very rare that the law firm will ask for your grades. I mean, it's just, you just have to look like you're very strong in your practice area, like you're very driven, that recruiter will do a write-up on how great you are. And, the recruiter just needs to get the person looked at and, without the grades being reviewed. And, once it starts, the law firm's not going to pay too much attention to attorneys' grades. And they're just going to evaluate them really on how well they interview and fit into the firm's culture. So, again, law firms will often interview you without asking for your grades. And as a matter of fact, I mean, the majority, like 80% of the people that we represent that have more than 3 or 4 years of experience, the grades, never come up. And, largest law firms have systems, so if a law firm's been around for 50 years, they have very well-defined systems of screening you for grades, and everything is kind of, very well done. But if a law firm, is newer, they often don't do these things. So if you have bad grades, you can apply to often newer firms and they'll just won't even think about it. They just don't have those procedures in place. So that's, a really good way to do things. But the older the firm, the more established the firm, the larger the firm, the more profitable the firm, the firms will just, bust you, get you away, not, hire you. Here's another big one. And this is something that is, that people don't realize. So a lot of attorneys, and now even more than ever with the internet, with people posting, able to sell things on social media and stuff, people are very proud of their entrepreneurial skills. They're proud that they've started businesses. They're proud that they've done these sorts of things, and they will put that on their resume. The problem with looking entrepreneurial is that if you look entrepreneurial, then why would you stay in a law firm and continue to work at a certain amount of money if you think you could do better on your own? That's exactly what happened to me. Like when I was younger, like in high school, then in college, then even in law school, several weeks a year. And then even after I graduated from law school and was working for a judge, I had this asphalt business in Michigan. And I knew that not only could I make more money doing the asphalt business, but I would have control over my time. I would be like, I could control how much money I made. I could do all these sorts of things. And then when I started learning about recruiters, after I quit my job at a firm called Dewey Valentine, they're like, you can't quit your job. If you want to work, and if you want to be, if you want to, get a position, if you want to stay in the legal profession and work at big firms, you need to start talking to recruiters. So I started talking to recruiters, and I was like, I understood what they were doing. I was like, I can do this myself. Like, I do not need to use I do not need to sit here and, work in a law firm when I can do so much better with my own business. And it's exactly what I did. And so, law firms do not necessarily like entrepreneurs. I mean, being entrepreneurial can be important when you become a partner and when you're close to being a partner, getting clients. But most attorneys, like the vast majority of them, are people that go to a firm, go to the desk, you go meet clients or whatever and work. And, you shouldn't be, you need to be someone that's reliable, kind of workhorse. And it doesn't matter really if you're an associate or partner, that's kind of the expectation. So, that's the kind of person that you need to be. So if you don't look that kind of person, you look like someone that is always going to be chasing something else or starting something. Law firms don't like that. I see resumes all the time of people that left law firms to start their own business or went to work at some startup where they had a piece of it didn't work out, and then they don't keep they're unable to get jobs because law firms know that they're going to come there and leave. It's very sad. I mean, I saw a guy, I'm working with a guy actually, when he started his career at Skadden, then he went and started some business, and he was in Skadden for like 5 years and started this business for like a year and a half, and it just didn't work. And then he's like, great qualifications. He, went to a top 20 law school and did really well, and really well. But then no one would hire him. So, you don't want to look too entrepreneurial on your resume. You need to downplay things, because if you are a business type person interested in starting businesses, you will always leave. That's what I saw. I've seen at every law firm I've ever worked at. There are certain personalities of people that just are entrepreneurial. That's in their blood. And entrepreneurs often bounce around from business to business to business. And, and maybe one way that they decide to support themselves while they're starting businesses. And if they're like that, they're always going to be talking about how you can make more money doing other things. They're going to be thinking that way. Often entrepreneurial attorneys will be interested in starting their own law firm. So they will develop really good relationships with clients and look like they're the only person that can help them. And the law firm and the partners aren't helping them, and then they'll try to steal those clients and set up their own law firm. It happens all the time. It happens with attorneys for big firms and small firms. So, it's just firms need to be careful about that. And, their job really as an attorney is to service effectively, corporations or entrepreneurs for their own business. And so, that's the job. And so an attorney that's doing that will often think, I could do this business, I could do that business, I want to start this business with this person. And that's what these attorneys will often do all the time. And, so you have to have a personality where you're more interested in others' problems and helping people that, are successful in business as opposed to, trying to be successful in your business. You have to have a personality that's like, a protector and, and that sort of thing, and not the opposite. Entrepreneurs are just different types of people, and you may be entrepreneurial, and a significant portion of the population is entrepreneurial. And if you think that way and you look that way in your resume, then it's not going to help you. When I had my asphalt business and I was applying to law firms, I had all this information and I was so proud of all this entrepreneurial stuff I did, and law firms weren't interested in that, until I took that off. So, you need to be doing, a job that you like. And again, if you're entrepreneurial, if you have an idea for a business, you should go all in. But you need to be very, very confident. I was confident recruiting. You're going to be very, very confident that you're going to succeed. You shouldn't take risks for the sake of taking risk. It's very common that attorneys will be at a large law firm. They will decide, a friend or someone they know is starting this business, get in, and maybe the business is getting venture funding or something. But almost always those businesses fail. So it's just something that, if you're going to take that risk, you need to be very, very calculated, very, very sure that you want to leave the legal profession. And, ultimately, if you are entrepreneurial, I will just kind of make this point to you, then, you can be entrepreneurial once you become a partner, bringing clients, and then you're kind of running your own little business. A law firm is paying you a percentage of the business that you generate and that they bill, and supporting you. You almost have like a little franchise and you can move around. So being a partner is entrepreneurial. But one of the things that I just wanted to kind of show you is that if you start your own business, and I always remember this when I started my own, because I was, friends were very successful lawyers at the time, but if you start a business and the business does $2 million in revenue a year, that's a good business. But if the profit margins are only 10%, then that's 200,000. So, can you keep your profit margins at that level? That's kind of the question, and you need to be very careful. So thinking about from a business standpoint, like how much revenue does a business need to make for me to and profit to me to make what I'm making now? And ultimately working in a law firm is actually very, very good in terms of the type of revenue you can make. It's money you can make. It's very, very good compared to other things. And so just important to, think about that. The other message it sends, if you start your own business and it doesn't work, the law firm's going to know that, you didn't have what it takes to make that business work and you failed. And that's not good. Not good failing. Lawyers do not want to get failed. And then they'll also know that if they hire you, you have this kind of entrepreneurial stuff in your blood and you're likely to leave again. So, almost every attorney that I've ever known that is able to go back to a law firm after starting their own business, all they're thinking about, all they're talking about in the back of their mind is how to start their own business. Like, what do they need to do? And that's what I did when I was at a law firm. I would order, back then nothing was online. You had to order these, books, and courses and things. I would look at courses about, being a tax resolution attorney, or how do I become a trust and estates attorney? I was always interested in moving and doing something else. And if I had moved to another firm, I would have been doing the same thing. I'd always be thinking about how do I start a business? Like, how do I, what do I do, differently? So, I would recommend, and I hate to say this, but if you've had a lot of entrepreneurial activity in the past, now, running a lawn care business or, starting something, selling knickknacks on eBay or whatever, it is not a real business. But if you have a real business, you need to be careful about how that's portrayed. And you just need to make sure that the law firm has the idea that, you're going to stay. So that's, very, very important. I remember when I started my first firm, I'd had this asphalt business. I had actually sold it before I moved to Los Angeles. I had made at the time, which I thought was a lot of money. I was able to put it down for the house, and other associates were just starting their careers, and no one had a house, and I had this, and I was very proud of like what I had done, and I could tell him, one of the hiring partners was like, "How much did you make in your business?" Like I was kind of felt like I was superior and like rubbing everyone's face, and I had this business, and then never really was happy working for other people. So the people that are entrepreneurs also like attention many times, and so that's not good. I mean, that it's a bit like they're superior to people that are kind of bookworms that have moved through. It's just it's not a good thing, and being too independent is not good. So you just need to tone it down on your resume and look like your main goal is working a law firm. I mean, you can write down that you had this business, and but you don't want to give a lot of detail about how great you are. A lot of these resumes that people have where they've had a business, they just brag and talk about in great detail like how great the business was, and that takes up all the makes it look like they will have more information about that than they'll have about their jobs. So your resume, and again, this is a very important point. This will get you profoundly more interviews. As just the webinar's going a little long, not too far from finishing. But if your resume looks like you're going to you're interested in other things in your practice area, then people will get the sense. They'll look at your resume and they'll think entrepreneur. They're not going to think litigation attorney. So everything in your resume should be geared towards your practice area. You take off things that don't have anything to do with your practice area. You just make it look as focused as you can. Because people want to look at a resume and they want to say, this person is this. They're just a corporate attorney, and that's all there is to it. And they don't want to look at your resume and see other things. They don't want to see other practice areas. They don't want to see details about business. They just want to see information about your practice area and why you're really good at your practice area. And people will, I was working a couple of years ago. I don't know if I actually ended up working with this person. I think I didn't. But a couple of years ago, I was talking to someone, and they had a resume that where they had worked, they were unemployed, and they'd had this resume where they'd worked at a big firm, and then after working at this big firm, they had put together a resume, and it was the craziest thing. The person was a corporate attorney, and they had with their experience, they had 4 or 5 sentences. They started their resume talking about all the pro bono work that they did, and so it was 4 or 5 sentences, and then one sentence talked about the corporate work they did, and they weren't getting interviews. People were like, what's up with this? And this, why would you hire someone who looked like they were interested in something else? I had another thing happen that was very sad. When I say sad, I mean I was very sad about it. And I actually hired this person to help with talking to new BCG candidates, things that came in, and they're preparing them for interviews. But he had gone to, I think, Harvard Law School. But when he went to Harvard, it was just he was, I think he got a Sears Prize or something, which is, I don't know, top 5 student. I mean, something really good. And he'd gotten a job at a really, really good law firm out of law school, and then had moved to another firm, I think, where he was doing all the appellate work. And then for whatever reason, wasn't employed there anymore. It was 8 or 9 years into his search. And I talked to him, and he was unable to successfully get a job. And because of that, was unemployed. I mean, it came to me. And again, don't take this negatively. I don't want this to reflect negative views of someone. I don't want to say I'm prejudiced against people with different backgrounds and sexual orientations, but his resume, when you looked at it talked about how he was gay, had been members of all these gay associations in law school, how he was members of all these gay groups outside of his law firm, how his interests were in, gay rights and things. And so he literally, on his resume, it was something like, 27 times when he was talking about gay stuff. And all someone would see when they looked at his resume is the focus wasn't on all this great experience in law schools, it was on something else. And it looked like he was interested in something else. Now, I'm not saying that, again, I'm not being prejudiced against that, but the reason that was bad, it could have been, about pinball machines or whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter what you write, but if you have stuff on your resume that just looks like you're interested in something else, that's where your focus is. That's not good. This guy was a litigator, so he should have had things all about litigation. That's what his resume should say. It should say everything about litigation. So when someone looks at your resume, they don't think about pinball machines or or your race or sexual orientation or anything. I mean, that's all important, and those are things you should be proud of. But at the same time, you don't want to have anything on your resume that detracts from what your focus is. Like your focus with the resume should be just like 100%. The more you can, you want people to look at your resume and think, this is this type of person, this is this type of practice area person, this is this type of attorney. And so, the better you do with that, the better off you're going to be. And this information I'm providing you right now is will save your career. I mean, you've been on this webinar a lot, but I can't, this will save your career, because people that don't get jobs because they put all this stuff that doesn't have anything to do with their resume. People will put all this stuff about politics like several times on the resume, or their racial background, or their, whatever. And, all this stuff is great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with your background or your sexual orientation, race, or your outside interest, or, talking about pinball machines. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that's wrong is when you make people think that that's where your focus is on your resume. So your focus, by the way, and again, this particular piece of information will save your career. I would like you to write it down. If people look at your resume, they just need to think you're this type of attorney. That's it. They don't need to think anything else. If you'd had 2 jobs before your current job, or you were doing, maybe your first job was doing trademark law, maybe your second job was doing, I don't know, helping out with tax law. Then your third job, you're suddenly doing nothing but litigation. You've been there for 2 years. You do not talk about your other practice area experience on your resume. That's going to mess you up. You just leave it blank. You say, I was at this firm, I was an associate at these dates, or that's it. You don't say anything else. You just you want people to look at your resume and think, this person's a tax attorney, this person is a corporate attorney. That's all they want to see. And they don't want to see outside interests that have nothing to do with your jobs. And I'll just be completely honest with you. If I've had experiences where I've had 2 candidates that literally went to the same law school, graduated the same year, and are in the same practice area, same location, searching for jobs. I will send the resume out to firms with a person that only has experience, that only talks about their experience in their one practice area and has, similar to that person. And then I will send a resume out to someone that decides that, they want to do nothing but talk about democratic politics or conservative politics or race or sexual orientation or whatever. They have all this stuff on their resume. The person that has all this stuff on their resume has nothing to do with their practice area, will often get no interviews. Whereas the person that doesn't have all the stuff in their practice area will get interviews. So just think about that. Like, why? Like, why would you do anything to detract from, your current practice area? So, legal, being an entrepreneur does that. Anything related to not your practice area is going to always hurt you. So this is another reason that law firms will reject you. One is that, maybe your law firm experience isn't good enough for the firms you're trying to apply to. So, again, you have to have the right experience or make it look like you want to do a certain type of job if you're going to get a position. You have to be focused. And so someone that's applying for a job doing securities law and then list on their resume 5 different types of corporate law, corporate generalist law, corporate M&A law, someone that does that is going to have a much more difficult time getting a job than someone that doesn't. You have to look as focused as possible as you can on a resume. Most law firms that are hiring laterally are, again, and I've made this point to you so many times during this webinar, but most law firms that are hiring laterally only want to hire people that are doing a certain type of work. That's it. Like, they don't want to hire people doing other things. That doesn't work for them. And so you would do the same things. Like, I had an experience once where it was the worst choice I ever made. I had this saltwater aquarium and I needed to have it serviced. And this guy came by and he lived in a very nice neighborhood. I think he was renting a room there or something, but he felt like he was very important because of his past financial success. And he wanted to clean my aquarium for me. And in addition, he was doing other odd jobs for people. And I hired him, but he had all these interests. So he came to clean my aquarium, and to get the algae off the side, he used this big aquarium. He used something with a razor blade on it instead of cleaning it with sponges or whatever. And we're in my aquarium. He wasn't experienced in it. He just did something that was outside the scope of his work. And that ended up, hurting him. So again, recruiter, right, you do the same thing. You just make sure your experience always tracks, what you, the practice here you're doing. You don't say a lot about the practice area that you're not getting a job for. And, the recruiters help you, draw all that out. So, good recruiter is able to help you, market you to various law firms, that are likely to have a position, and it's not that important, but, okay. So we're almost, I think there's not a lot of these reasons left, but this is a very important webinar. So if you're working outside of a law firm, like you decide you want to go in-house, you decide you want to do something with the government, it just doesn't matter. There's some exceptions like judicial clerkships, but most law firms will not hire people that are in-house. It happens all the time. And so if you're coming from another practice, setting, law firms won't hire you. I've had situations where I've had candidates that went to, top 5 law schools, and then they maybe worked at a really good firm like, Wilson Sons Senior, Fenwick or something. And then they decided that they wanted to, go to come back to the law. Most law firms are not interested in that at all. They will, reject those candidates. They'll reject them because they know that if someone left the law firm practice setting to go into another practice setting, that the odds are very, very good that they won't stay in that practice setting after, they won't come back. Why would a law firm want to hire someone that's from another practice setting? So if you leave a law firm and you go do something else, your odds of getting hired are very, very slim. So what I was talking about earlier was an attorney from a top 5 law school that went in-house after working at Fenwick or whatever, and then wanted to come back. I've seen so many examples. That person can apply to 50 firms in Silicon Valley, and no one's going to hire them. They want to hire people from the same practice setting. You would too. So that's just kind of how it works. If you decide you want to go into another practice setting, law firms are, often not going to hire you. You should be very, very careful if you're making those sorts of moves. Law firms, are different than working in-house. When you go to work in-house, you may be, working on, more of a generalist. The sophisticated work is typically referred out to law firms. People that are in law firms are committed to that career path. And if you decide you want to do something else than a law firm, then you are pretty much, not completely, but you're often throwing away the idea of working in a law firm. And, I'm going to just make a pitch here for law firms. I do nothing but law firm placements. But when you work in a law firm, you are in a position where you can do that into your 70s or 80s. I mean, you will get clients, you will become expert in a practice area, you will have work to do if you commit. When you go in-house, in-house jobs typically don't last very long. First of all, they're very hard to get. So, all the work you do to get an in-house job in a in-house company is hard, but it's, the in-house companies prefer people coming from law firms because they have recent relevant experience doing one thing. But when you go in-house and you're looking for a job, you don't have that. So you're not going to be as in demand for other in-house jobs. So it's even harder to get an in-house job once you go to an in-house job. The biggest danger of going into an in-house job is related to the fact that, you typically won't last very long there. You won't last very long because law companies will change CEOs. When the CEO comes, a new CEO comes in, they often want their own legal department, their own legal people. Companies will change their general counsel, and that general counsel will want to let people go. Companies will go out of business and you'll lose your job. Companies will have layoffs because, legal department's a cost center, not a profit center. Companies will, all these things will happen in companies that you can't control. And when that happens, you lose your job, and then you need to move to another in-house job. And that's difficult. Sometimes people take in-house jobs in smaller areas. I had a guy that got a really good in-house job in Vail, Colorado, bought a house and then lost it. And then was like, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I don't have any money to pay for my house or my mortgage. And so people will, often, run into issues there as well. So it's very, very difficult if you move in-house. So, and then they won't be able to get jobs in law firms because it looks like they want to work in-house and their experience isn't as relevant. So, if you decide to go in-house, you can pretty much be guaranteed you'll lose your job at some point. It could be 1 year, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, and then you're going to have a very difficult time finding a new job. You do not have the sort of security that you have working in a law firm. Now, sometimes people don't want to work in law firms, and I don't want to work in-house, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you decide to do that, then you have to realize that it's going to have a bearing on your future. Law firms also, like if you're at a given law firm, say you're at a mid-sized law firm and you've been there for 5 years, Well, law firms know that law firm. They know the quality of work that's expected to be done in a law firm, and they have all of this kind of information, that is going to, will, show them, that you're likely to stay. So, and you are doing work of a certain quality. But law firms do not know what the quality of work that's expected of you from an in-house job, because every company is different. So there's no way to evaluate, the strength in your practice areas. So, in some practice areas, like if you go to a real estate company, you want to come back to working in real estate in a law firm, or, you're a patent attorney in-house or something, it's not as difficult to transition back to a law firm. But in general, once you transition back to a law firm, it's very, very difficult to go back. So what does a good recruiter do? A good recruiter will stress to the law firms that, you're hungry, that you are dissatisfied with the work, you really want to go back, you've learned your lesson, and they can stress that. They will often try to make your experience look very, very focused in your practice area, like you may be getting even better types of work that is going to help you when you go back, and then also one of the things that you can often do when you're in-house is bring the clients back. So you look a strong, being a client. I had an instance several years ago where I was working with a guy that had very good qualifications and had worked for General Motors and the legal department, had been there for like 15 or 20 years. He was friends and knew very, very well all of the big firms in Detroit and some in Chicago. He knew the chairs of the firms. He knew the most powerful partners that had the most work, and he of course was giving them work. He knew all these people, and he, thought, when he lost his job because there was something to do with seat belts and some things that happened in the legal department. The legal department didn't pay attention to, so they fired anyone whose desk it may have crossed. And he thought, because of all this great experience working for all these big firms in Detroit, like every one of them, as well as these big firms in Chicago that he gave work to, that all of these law firms would be interested in him. But it was the exact opposite. When he applied to those firms, it was just crickets. Like no one even responded. So, after years of giving them, millions or tens of millions of dollars worth of work, no one cared. It's just, that's how hard it is when you go in-house. And so, you need to find, if you're in-house, you need to find firms that are interested in hiring you. It's often going to mean going to smaller firms that couldn't find people with your expertise in the market normally. So, that's just, kind of how it works. So the next one, again, I apologize that, these are all very, very important reasons. And I apologize that this is a longer webinar, but the information is extremely important. And I'm, impressed, for everyone's longer webinar. But the other thing that's very, very difficult is if you're currently unemployed. So if you're currently unemployed as an attorney, it becomes very, very difficult to find a job. The reason is, just think about it from the law firm's perspective. They can hire someone who's employed. If that person's employed, they know that they're probably doing good work and they're a better catch than someone who's unemployed. In some markets, like New York City, where there's so many people and there's so many options that a law firm has when they're hiring someone. In some markets like that, if you're trying to get another job in a large law firm and you're unemployed, I mean, your odds are like literally, like for a large law firm, I mean, I wouldn't say impossible, but I would say next to impossible, because the law firms in big cities have so many options of the type of people they're going to hire. So why would they hire you when they can hire someone who's employed? They have absolutely no incentive, and they don't. So it's very, very important to understand that. Law firms are not impressed with candidates who are unemployed. They just want to hire people that look like they're doing very, very well, and they're wooing someone away who is a real asset instead of someone who's unemployed. But, law firms, if you're unemployed, it can mean a number of things. One of the big ones is, you're fired because there's something wrong with you. Most attorneys that are unemployed don't just leave their firms voluntarily. They leave because the firm's telling them to leave. And they only are telling them to leave if usually, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons. I mean, the person's work could not be, the law firm could run out of work, the law firm could be having financial problems, the law firm could decide that they no longer have a certain practice area. I mean, those are all reasons that an attorney could lose their job. But what's important to understand in general is that the best people, the law firm will never let go. So even when a law firm's laying people off, if a law firm has a corporate department and they decide they need to lay off 15 people, well, there may be 20 people there. And so those 20 people, 5 people aren't let go. So that means that you weren't kind of the best person there. And that's how law firms look at it. And it's unfortunate. That's kind of how it works. So, law firms, that fire people, a big one that happens a lot is that the person's not billing enough hours. If you're not billing enough hours, it's often because you don't have the ability, people aren't giving you work. And so the best attorneys are always given a lot of work. So you need to be in a position where you look like you're getting enough work. So if you're in a law firm, and I also can't stress this enough, you're basically, your job is to get as much work as possible and to never have that work slow down. So you need to be the best in your practice area. You need to be the most aggressive seeking out work and getting work. It's hugely important. I had an attorney, this is another guy that was unemployed, and he was in New York, and he lost his job because this firm, required everyone to be ready to get an email at some point during the day on Mondays from a person in Boston that was assigning work. And he just didn't respond quickly enough. And so he never had enough work and he got fired. And then, even though he went to Columbia Law School or, some really good firm, school and was working in a big firm, no one would hire him in New York. So many times attorneys will quit their job. They will quit, things like, they'll say things like they don't like the management or their issues with a firm. And sometimes these firms are 100+ years old. Like, how do you say that, you suddenly don't like this firm that's been around 100 years and probably be around another 100? It's not a good explanation. And so, if you quit a job, there's always going to, the law firms are, going to look at that in a negative way, and it's not a good thing. If you feel like you're going to quit your job and you need to quit your job because it's just so stressful or whatever, or you don't like the people or you're not getting along, then you need to, find a job as quickly as possible. There are cases in law firms where, you may do something that you didn't think was wrong, but was wrong, and you lose your job. You could just make an offhand remark, you could get too drunk, you could, do something you shouldn't have done or upset one partner, and you kind of lose all of your political and relationship capital at the firm, and the firm ends up letting you go. And so, you need to be very, very careful. You need to have good relationships, and you need to get along with everyone. A law firm is not a place where you should be taking sides in political issues, where you should be part of an associate group that doesn't like the firm, where, you just need to be seen as someone that's there, dedicated, supportive of the firm, and looks good, because otherwise, you're going to get into trouble. So you should never quit a job. The job of an attorney, by the way, in your career in a law firm, and this is something, again, that you should write down. It's extremely important, and I hope you write it down. This is literally, listening to this and writing it down, and write it down in big letters and keep it somewhere. Your job as an attorney, this is your only job, is to always have access to work. You always need to have access to work. So that means, and it should never stop. That means you have access to work at your current firm until you find a new firm. It means that you do good work because you want to have access to work. It means that you impress the right partners because you want to have access to work. It means you don't get involved in politics because you want access to work. It means that you have a good resume that doesn't take people the other way because you want to have access to work. Then the job of the partner is to bring in business and have access to work. So your entire job as an associate is to have access to work. The more work you get and the more hours you build, the more access to work you show that you have. And law firms like that. So access to work is the number one responsibility of the law firm attorney. Regardless of, you need to always be working. An attorney should not have any gaps in their resume. You always need to be working. And I'm sorry to say that. People think, oh, I'm going to take a few years off. Oh, I'm going to do this. I needed some time for personal reflection. No, doing those things will hurt you. You need to have access to work. Please write this down. This is the most important thing. You lose access to work when you take side in politics. You lose access to work when you make your resume about something other than your practice area. You lose access to work when you get senior and you're not working on developing a book of business. You always need to have access to work. And I can't stress this enough. You don't want to be unemployed. If you are unemployed, you want to get a job quickly. An attorney should always be working. And by working, I mean, you should always be working, and getting work as much as you can. That's one reason I don't like going in-house, because when you go in-house, you can't control all these outside factors, company going out of business, company having financial problems, new general counsel coming in, new CEO, like whatever. You just can't control it. You're not going to have access to work. You need to have access to work. Please, please, please remember this. Anything that detracts from you having access to work, getting involved with the wrong people, making mistakes with people, all these sorts of things are going to hurt you. So, your ability to have access to work is is huge. If you quit your job and you have reasons for it, then, regardless of your logic, people aren't going to want to hire you. It just happens. Another thing that happens too is very, very interesting. I have hired in my career as recruiters, I've hired a lot of people that have lost their previous job and been fired from the previous job. And what happens, it's very interesting. Like it's happened consistently. Like there's so many people, like people that were fired and mad about it. Like they come to work for me and then they end up being mad at me and quitting the job or starting competing firms and all sorts of things. So, if you're fired from a job, the odds are pretty good that you'll quit the next one as well. And when you go to the next firm, you may be angry and you may, quit as well. So that's, the people that I've hired that have been fired from the previous jobs come in and they almost always make problems. And so that's how law firms, view it. So, if you are fired, there are often reasons that you can't control. Sometimes a law firm may have a couple big litigation cases and they'll all settle and they have no ability to get it, to do anything else. Sometimes, their law firms may, lose clients and things may happen. The market for what you do may, just go off the face of the earth as a corporate attorney. So you can often explain it. Sometimes people will leave because of significant family crises, like, maybe their child's sick, maybe their parents sick, maybe you got sick, maybe something happened personal to you that you couldn't control. I mean, law firms don't care if you take time off and you have a child or something, they actually respect it. But any other reasons, you need to make sure you're very, very careful of not letting people know about, because if you have other reasons that have anything possibly to do with your performance, it's going to hurt you. So you need to be very, very careful. You don't want gaps in your resume. You always want access to work. Whatever you possibly can do out of access to work, you need to do it. If you're fired from your job, you need to say, I'm not going to coach you how to do it right, but you say, I need to be on your website for 3 months. And in 2 months, then you say, no, I need 3 months. And I'm very unhappy about what happened here. I think you misled me, whatever. But you need to negotiate doing that so it looks like you're working and you can have, access to work. Also, it's, when you go to work at a firm, it's important to understand, like, how long did the previous person stay here? Like, what is going on? Why am I getting a new job? And oftentimes you'll see that law firms aren't stable. They don't keep people around. So you need to be very careful. And this is the final one. You need to be, careful about drawing too much, attention to things that don't have anything to do with the practice of law. A lot of times people put all this stuff about politics on there. So if you are very interested in Republican politics, like, why would you put that on your resume when the law firm is that when half the law firms may not be Republicans? If you're in San Francisco, none of them. I mean, you just don't put anything on there about that. I had an instance in just September 11th. I had a guy that had all this stuff about being Muslim on his resume, which was great, and there's nothing wrong with that, and an Arabic last name. And he was applying to firms in New York. And candidates that were similar to him didn't have all the stuff in their resume were getting interviews. Now, this is prejudicial to law firms, but again, drawing attention to things that don't have any. And again, I'm not criticizing someone for being Muslim. Just just being very, very clear here. But at that point in history, like, people were just it wasn't working. Sometimes law firms may be only men. A lot of law firms like that. Sometimes law firms may be only women. You can't control that. Other law firms might be all African Americans or, Democrats or Republicans. And so, there's, people need to be very, very careful about what they list on the resume. I had a woman from Stanford Law School that was exceptional, great grades, all this sort of stuff. But, she'd only been able to get a job coming out of Stanford, which, clear, it's like #1 law school in the country. I don't know, but it's really good. She had all this stuff on her resume, which may have helped her get into Stanford, about how she was raped and, was involved in a leading organization for rape victims. And, like I said about previously, like, that's all that stood out, on her resume, and, it made people uncomfortable. It was, it's not that, I don't see there's anything wrong with that, but she refused to take it off her resume. And, she wasn't getting interviews. I told her about this, and, she stated it was who she was and she needed to talk about it. She needed other people to know. That was her decision, but she didn't get interviews because of it. Just like the guy I told you about that, had 27 references to his sexual orientation as resume. you just don't put this stuff on your resume. You be very, very careful. And, there's, you just need to understand your resume needs to look neutral. It just needs to be, geared towards, what a law firm wants. And so, what I would do is I would, if you want to talk about how you're a Democrat, then you need to apply to firms that have a lot of Democrats. You just have to, work around that. And, you need to remove information on your resume that's not where your practice here are making things. And this is the last one, then we're done and I'll take questions. But, sometimes people are old, like, they could be, very senior associates, or they could be, much older attorneys. And unfortunately, most law firms want to hire people that are younger. There's a perception that they're going to work hard. There's a perception that they're more likely to follow directions and be deference, partners. And so a partner doesn't want to have to, be ordering, someone who's in their 50s or 60s to work 3,000 hours a year. They just don't, and they know you won't, and you may be disillusioned working in law firms. If you have all these things, law firms are often going to avoid you. They will know, and I hate to say this, but people that are older, may just not be as committed, and then resentful of younger partners telling them what to do, and then sometimes law firms will hire, sometimes a lot of people go to law school in their 40s or something, and hire an attorney. Attorney will be a first year. Again, law firms are businesses and they want to hire people that are most likely, to work hard. And it's unfortunate, and when you become a senior associate, if you have to leave, that would be an older attorney, or, if you get in the legal profession when you're older, or, you're in your 40s or 50s and you don't have business, and, you're trying to work in a law firm, and all the stuff will make it very, very difficult for you. So, recruiter, good one, will you have a lot of energy. They will stress your profound and very good experience in your practice area. And this is someone, something that you need to do. You need to look like you're more qualified, like you will, be very, very good at whatever you're doing, and that will help you get a job. So, just a few points. You're most marketable when you have 1 to 6 years of experience. Beyond that, you need to get business. You need to, understand how to be focused with law firms in your interviews. And then, you need to realize if you're not getting interviews because of these top 10 things. And so, final thing is, if you clean up your resume and your background, I can't emphasize this enough. You will always get a job if you apply to enough places. Everybody does. It's just, you cannot get discouraged. You need to apply as many places as you possibly can. Openings, non-openings, whatever. You need to make sure that you're very focused there. So I'll take a quick break for everyone. So again, this is the longer presentation, but it was very important. I encourage you to, during this break, to think of any questions you have. Everything is confidential. I'm not going to show your name, but the more questions you have about this or your career, this is a very good opportunity to ask them. I charge a lot of money for private coaching and things, and you can get the same benefit without spending $1,000 for your answers to your questions as you would get were you doing private coaching. So that's one of the big benefits of being on this. You can ask me whatever you want about your situation and what you're thinking about your career goals, about things that you think may be holding you back in your career, but just ask away, because the answers to these questions that you have will help other people. And that's kind of the goal here, is we want to help each other and really become much more, successful as attorneys. Just a couple of minute break, and then I will be back with your questions. Thank you. All right, so let's do this. Excited for all your questions. Just give me 1 second here, and I will stop sharing and pull up the questions. Hey, and great job for everyone. I noticed that, at the start of this webinar, almost everyone that started is still here. So you're definitely not alone. Thousands of people, and you've lost just a few hundred. So that's good. So this is, obviously, I think this information is being very well received, which I'm very happy about. So I'm sorry, just creating the questions here. But yeah, everyone, great job staying in this webinar, because it was a lot of information, but extremely important for your career. So I'm going to start with some of the most important, most recent questions, then I'll go to some of the earlier ones too. Okay, just give me 1 second here. I'm just going to figure out the screen to share here. Yeah, and just again, awesome job. You'll do even a better job if you ask questions that you don't necessarily know doing that, that for you. 1 second. Okay, so first question. Again, great job asking all these questions. Is there anywhere that we can go to see statistics about hiring in the specific fields of law in general? For example, let me see here. For instance, in the field of pharmacy, I hear statistics that there are 20% more pharmacy graduates and pharmacy jobs available.
is there a place where we can look to see the numbers for things like this? So the most important fact to be aware of is, first of all, there are certain practice areas that are kind of always going to be marketable. So, things like litigation is always marketable. You can always find most firms do litigation. So that's, important to understand. Most firms do litigation. So if you are trying to do, if you're interested in doing litigation, for example, you can always find a firm that does that. When you get into very specialized practice areas, you're talking about pharmacy, for example, like say you were a patent attorney specialized in drugs, you would be very marketable if you could find a firm that did that kind of work, because there's not. So the more specialized your practice area, often the easier it is to get a job. So an example might be if you are like an ERISA attorney, like there's not a lot of ERISA attorneys. So if you're an ERISA attorney, it's often much easier to find a job than if you're in any other practice area. So because there's just not a lot of people like you, but there's going to be fewer jobs. So the more specialized your practice area, the more likely you are to get jobs. I had an interesting thing happen years ago. I had an attorney that was very senior. He was like in his 60s, and he had been doing one type of patent prosecution. It was something involving optics. And I could be making that up, but I believe it was optics. He was doing something involving optics. And as part of that work, there were very few people in the country that worked on optic patents. And I was able to find him a firm in Texas that did that. They saw his resume and they were like, this is incredible. So he was losing his job and getting fired, but he found a firm that did exactly what he did. And even though there was no opening, they were like, this is incredible. We're going to hire this guy. So the more specialized you are in a practice area, the better off you're going to be. So you want to be specialized as you possibly can many times, but then there's going to be fewer jobs. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. Practice areas like litigation, you can always get a position. There's always plenty of people doing litigation, but you have to apply to a lot of places many times. Another good practice area, the best practice area right now, by the way, if you are interested in thinking about starting your own business, or you're a junior and you are coming out of law school, or you're thinking about a practice area switch, trust in estates is huge. Like, it's huge. Like there's so much interest in it. Almost every trust in estates attorney I'm working in is getting interviews. So, understanding the certain practice areas and making decisions about that is important. But ultimately, when you choose a practice area, you should be going into a practice area, go into a practice area, where you're likely to stay, you're likely to stay and that you enjoy. So you can switch practice areas if you want. I mean, it's not easy to do. I did an interview with Law 360 pretty recently. They wrote an article about that and I wrote about it. I put a new article on BCG about it. But you want to go into practice areas where you're likely to stay and not leave. And so, meaning that it's interesting to you. So it has to be interesting. And you have to feel, committed to the practice area. It has to be interesting, and you have to feel committed to doing that practice area. So that means that it's just the work or the type of work or the working for that type of client is interesting. So some people are really interested in trust in estates. Whatever. I mean, some people are really interested in corporate because they like helping businesses. Other people are interested in litigation because they like conflict or whatever. I mean, you have to choose what practice area you're into. But I'm going to give you kind of two big pointers right now for the practice area you might be in if you don't enjoy it, or the practice area you may be choosing, to go into as an attorney. So there's two types of practice areas. There's transactional, which is just things like real estate, corporate, et cetera, things where you're doing transactions like, buying and selling, that sort of thing. I mean, I don't know how to, maybe it's more than that, but buying and selling, et cetera, documenting things. So there's practice areas like that. It's transactional. People that like that are typically math, science, econ, like those types of interests. So if you major in those things in college and you really like math and you really like science and things, you really should probably be in a transactional type practice area. That's going to be the one where you're most likely to get a job. So if that's transactional, then you also have litigation related practice areas. So litigation related practice areas, you have non-transactional. So non-transactional is things like is going to be, litigation, employment, maybe, all types, anything involving writing. So, if you like things involving writing, which means you might have majored in, English or, things like that, writing, etc., or interested in people, it could be like psychology, things like you're often going to be, much better off in that as a practice area. So you should choose the practice area that best fits, your interest. But people that are transactional tend to be less interested in people. They like math and science, not transactional. That could change that. Again, this is a very good question. That could change the entire course of your career and what you're interested in if you choose the right practice area. I remember I was applying, I was a summer associate in a big firm, and the firm's no longer in existence. It was called Reba, and then it merged with another firm and went out of business. But I was a summer associate in this firm, and the firm was, choosing, people to work there full time. And I remember when they asked me what practice area I was interested in, they asked me, and I was like, I'm tax. And then I remember the hiring partner there was like, that's what the firm was like, said, are you sure? Are you sure? Not corporate? Are you sure not corporate? And thankfully I was going to do a judicial clerkship, and so I got a soft offer to come back, but I think I would have gotten a hard offer to come back had I stressed that I wanted to do corporate, because they were interested in corporate people, and that was not my interest. I didn't like the transactional nature of being a corporate attorney. So you have to be very careful, with the practice area you choose. Again, these are great questions, and those people are asking very good questions, and thank you for everyone who's asking questions. I will answer as many as I can. That's the time perspective. Okay, how can I differentiate myself from candidates who may have similar qualifications but are perceived as higher flight risk? Are there particular indicators or red flags that firms look for during the hiring process that should be aware and proactively address? So flight risks are, show if you're moving a lot, and often moving to firms that aren't as good, and then, just a lot of movement on your resume. But the big thing that I stressed earlier about your resume and addressing potential flight risk is if you have things on your resume that are not related to your practice area. So I saw a woman, and it was interesting. She had worked in an entertainment company before law school, and then during law school, she was on all the entertainment society of things. And then, I noticed all this stuff about entertainment, and she got a job in a big New York firm. She was from a diverse background. And she came to me and she's like, I want to do entertainment. So, that's a red flag. Anytime you have stuff in your resume that shows you might be interested in another practice area, that's a red flag. Or, so that's what they're going to be looking for. Now, a non-red flag, like something you can do to address red flag is, if you're looking for a job and you're comfortable with a firm, whatever, having really strong references, like just, people that will vouch for you and help you. And so you need to be aware of that. Like if you have, maybe you're at your third firm, but you have extremely good recommendations from people you worked for in the past, you can list those as references in the resume. That can help. Or just to show, that, you may not be so much of a flight risk for your new firm. So those are some of the things I think that, people are always, going to be looking for. But make sure your resume looks like that's the only thing you're interested in. I talked about things like entrepreneurial, things that say entrepreneurial things, so you need to be, careful of that, and, just looking like you're very focused on one. Okay, could you elaborate on specific aspects of law firm experience that are considered not good enough or inappropriate by top firms? I'm curious if this primarily relates to the size of the firm, the type of clients handled, or the complexity of cases. How can an attorney with such experience still position themselves effectively for competitive roles? Okay, so this is a very important rule to kind of understand. I'm glad you asked this question. So the rule is the larger the firm, the more specialized you need to look. So what does that mean? So that means if the firm, has an opening for a product liability attorney, litigator, you need to, you can do nothing but that. This is your focus, because they will hire someone that does that, and they can find that person if they're a large firm and pay a lot. If you are a corporate attorney, a generalist, and the law firm is seeking, corporate M&A attorney, they're going to get that person. They will get someone with that focus. So I hope that makes sense to you. But essentially what I'm saying is the larger the firm, the more specialized you're going to need to be. So that's one of the reasons it's very difficult for people to get into firms after they've been, to get into firms after they've been a generalist or somebody working in a smaller firm. You have to look like you're very, very focused. So the larger the firm, the more focused. Now, it's interesting to me. So, if someone is in, and I just was working something like that recently, if someone is in Madison, Wisconsin and doing corporate, the odds are they're not going to be as focused. They'll be doing, they will be doing M&A, they'll be doing, security, mostly generalist work, because a market like Madison isn't going to have clients that are as large. So the attorneys don't have to be as focused. They kind of need to do everything because the clients aren't huge. So when you move to larger cities like, New York, Houston, Dallas, Miami, like, those types of markets, like, and maybe not Miami as much, but, big markets. So when Chicago, when you're trying to work at big markets and big firms, they're going to expect you to be very specialized. That's one of the reasons, by the way, like if you're a law student, for instance, deciding where you want to work, it's one of the reasons that people that are coming from, if you go to work in a smaller market or smaller firm, you're going to be more of a generalist, and it's going to make it very, very difficult for you to get into larger firms. So this is, again, if you're a law student, this could be one of the most important things you hear. If you want to be a specialist and work in if you want to work in a large law firm, you need to be a specialist. You can't expect to get jobs in large law firms if you're a generalist. The size of the market you go will determine the type of attorney you are. So if you're working in Madison, Wisconsin, you're a generalist, your odds of getting a position in a major law firm are very, very slim, unless the law firm has, there's firms like Foley and Lardner, I think, has an office in Wisconsin. There's big firms in those markets, but you need to be a specialist if you possibly can be. I mean, it's just hugely important to work in a larger law firm. And let me just see if there's another part of this question. Yeah. So how does it work at larger law firms? So larger law firms, this is something that have larger clients, and larger clients often have unlimited budgets or close to for their issues. So if you're at a larger law firm and that law firm has larger clients, then you're going to be not only specialized, but able to go into more detail with issues. So what does that mean? That means that, if some issue comes up, like, whatever the problem is for corporate attorney, litigator, like you will go in depth, like you will look at every possible way to solve that problem because you have the resource to do so. But if you go to a smaller firm, then, or in a smaller market, that client's not going to have that budget. So you're not going to be able to work as hard or go into so much detail because the client's not paying it. So again, very important to understand large law firms coming up against mid-sized law firms or smaller law firms, they win much more, do better much more often than attorneys that are going to work in smaller law firms, because those smaller law firms don't have the budget to fight or get things done that the larger law firms have. It happens all the time. So it's just very important. So, if you're at a larger law firm, you're going to have a sense of arrogance. You're going to believe you're better than the other attorneys. I mean, and you're probably going to win or get the better end of the deal, and you're going to be able to learn more. So the training, the larger the law firm you're at, the more the training, the more specialized you can be, the more you will win, the more pride you'll have. I mean, it's all these things. And, I talk to attorneys from small law firms all the time, and they're like, oh, we went up against this big law firm and we won, or we did this, but it's very rare because the clients just can't afford it. So, going to a larger law firm will give you the ability to work on more sophisticated matters and go into more depth. And it's important, that's one of the things that happens when you go to the best law schools. When you go to the best law schools, you get into the firms where you're going to be able to go into more detail. And that level of thinking in detail, you don't get at a mid-sized firm or a smaller, because those firms don't have the budget. So, hate to say it, there's nothing wrong with mid-sized or smaller law firms, but those law firms will often, not be the best places to work if you want to be able to go into a lot of detail and stuff. Here's the next question. If an attorney has strong experience, hold on a second, just start up. If an attorney has strong experience in one area of law but wants to switch to a different practice area, how should they approach law firm interviews to overcome the not good enough or not appropriate experience barrier? Are there specific ways to highlight their adaptability and potential to succeed in the new area? Okay, so just think about it from the law firm's point of view. So if a law firm wants to hire someone in a certain practice area and they can attract people on their own, why would they hire you if they can get people that are already doing the practice area? So I was talking about this with a reporter recently, and I gave the example of I had an attorney that was first in their class from a top 25 law school, had gotten a job with one of a top national firm in San Diego, and then decided that he wanted to switch practice and do something else. And he applied to 100+ firms and didn't get a single interview because he wanted to switch from litigation to corporate, or IP litigation to corporate. No one was interested in him, even though he was a first year. So how do you do it? Like, how do you go into another practice area? The only way to do it, there's a couple ways. You can certainly network. I've seen people that want to be a privacy attorney, go get like privacy certifications. you can network, you can, you can do all sorts of things to help you with, getting a position. But, overall, it's very, very hard. So typically, when you want to switch practice areas, you need to go to, less prestigious firms or, find positions in markets, in small markets where, where there are not a lot of attorneys. So that's really that, it's very, very difficult to switch practice areas. What would I do if I was trying to switch practice areas? The example I gave you, the guy in San Diego, he just kept lobbying his own firm to give him experience in that practice area. And they didn't, and finally they did and allowed him to switch practice areas. But you can do it in your own firm. Oftentimes you can try to lobby people in your own firm for work. So you can try to get work from those people. And then if you're able to get work from them, then, that's good. And then you're able to potentially switch practice areas in your own firm. But very, very hard. Why, again, you just put yourself in a situation, the law firm. Why would a law firm hire someone from another practice area when they can hire people on their own? The other problem of switching practice areas, and I'll just throw it out there, just say that if you really want to switch practice areas, quite often, the problem with doing that is there's going to be, there's a perception that you probably won't like that practice area either. So, it's very common. Attorneys will be at a large law firms. They don't like the large law firm, mid-sized law firm. They're often unhappy there. And then the people that switch practice areas often, think they'll be happy if they switch practice areas, but it's still a law firm. It's still the billable hour pressure. It's still all those different things. And so those people aren't happy either. So, your practice area that you choose coming out of law school is very, very important. Now, there are some switches that are less difficult to make. So if you are in a transactional practice area, which would be, all the things I talked about earlier, real estate, corporate, it's often easier to move from one transactional practice area to another. So because, it's just similar, like if that makes sense, one to another, it's easier. If you're in a non-transactional practice, if you're in a non-transactional practice area, which would be something like, litigation, maybe you're doing insurance defense and you want to do commercial litigation, those switches are, much easier to make. So switching within one transactional practice area to another. So, you could be doing corporate M&A and you want to do general corporate, like that's an easy switch. Even with sometimes large law firms, you're doing product liability and you want to do general commercial litigation. That's not as hard either. So those are some switches that, are never going to be too difficult to make. Okay, all great questions. I'm going to get to them all. Thank you for everyone who's asking them. I mean, this advice is invaluable. It's just things that, really help you. How do law firms perceive candidates who spend time in non-traditional legal roles, such as in-house counsel or public interest work? What steps can I take to make my non-law firm experience appealing to law firm recruiters? Okay, so again, these are all business decisions. So these are business decisions that law firms make. So what does that mean? That means that, if you were a law firm, would you prefer to hire someone who's been doing nothing but working in a law firm, or someone that's coming from an in-house position? I mean, you would choose to hire the person that's coming from a law firm because they're committed to that practice setting, and someone that's left to go in-house may leave again. So, it's very, very difficult for attorneys to transition into those types of roles if they're coming from in-house counsel, if they're coming from public interest work. It's just extremely difficult. I mean, I run across people, like not that often, but probably every couple of weeks, that went to Yale Law School and did all this public interest stuff and now decide that they're going to grace a law firm with their presence, and law firms just don't invite you to Yale. I mean, you're not doing law firm work. So how do you make yourself appealing to recruiters? You need to stress expertise in your practice area, in one practice area. So, you need to look like whatever type of work you did in-house, if you were working for a real estate company and you were doing all commercial purchases and sales, like that would be marketable to a law firm. If you talked about that experience, if you're working for an insurance company, that could be marketable to insurance defense firms. But you need to make your law firm experience look like it's relevant to working in a law firm. And kind of the way it works is, the more non-traditional of a candidate you are, meaning coming from in-house or coming from public interest, like you can't expect to get to the best law firms with that, because the best law firms are going to hire specialists and they're going to have choices for the types of people they hire. So you need to start looking down to firms that may not be as good, that can't find people like you, with your experience or with your background that have a hard time getting people to work for them. Maybe they're in a weird geographic location, maybe they don't pay a lot. So, you need to get the best job you can. So you need to target, small law firms, but then also larger law firms. I mean, you need to target smaller law firms, mid-sized law firms, firms in geographic locations where there's not a lot of people searching for jobs. So that's how you make yourself appealing. I saw one guy, it was very interesting. Like he was in-house and he was there for he'd been at a big law firm that he'd been in-house for 7 or 8 years. And he was using Latham and Watkins as his company's law firm. And when he was working on these matters that he was referring to them, he worked 3,000 hours a year, and his work was really high quality. And they were like, hey, even though you're 10 or 15 years out of law school and don't fit our mold, I mean, Latham can hire anyone. We would love to, hire you. And so they hired him based on this incredible work ethic and focus on his practice area. And it was a very, very good move for them. They hired someone that was very good. So, so you need to make sure that you're able to, stress really good experience in their practice area. You can talk about all of your experience on your resume in-house in a way that looks like you're focused on a practice area. And that's going to be attractive to recruiters. That's really my biggest piece of advice. But, just realizing that depending on the size firm you want to work at, and I mean, you may have to work in a smaller firm, but you need to look very focused on your practice area. You just don't want to go all over the place. And the problem with people that are coming from in particular is that, you look like someone that's probably going to not be focused, that's not doing the highest quality work. So you need to stress all this responsibility you had, everything you're doing in that practice area, and take off things that aren't relevant to that practice area. And then probably look at smaller to mid-sized firms, and you'll be okay. And great question, because this particular question you asked could help tens of thousands of in-house counsel. And all these questions you ask are, transcribed, and then, we put them on the website. I mean, they're not from you, but we reword them. So, just this particular question will probably be viewed the answer by thousands of people over the next, few decades. So every question you guys are asking is really helping thousands of people. So I just want you to understand, because there's just at BCG, I mean, there's 170,000 or 80,000 unique visitors per month of people coming and looking for answers to these questions. So this particular question was just awesome. So thank you for asking it. Okay, for law students who are struggling to secure interviews due to a lack of experience or because of the competitive market, what can they do to improve their chances? Are there specific types of extracurricular activities, certifications, or networking strategies that compensate for this gap and make them more appealing to potential interviewers? Okay, so as a law student, your resume can do a couple things. You can talk about something you did before law school, if you did, and working for a company, working for whatever, and try to make it look relevant to employers. So one of the things I've seen a lot of times is people will go, and maybe they were a nurse, a female or male nurse for 3 or 4 years or 10 years before going to law school or whatever. And then they get into law school and they're in the Health Law Society. And that looks very, very good. So a law firm that needs healthcare attorneys is going to love to hire someone like that. That makes them appealing to potential employers. Or say you before law school, you worked for an investment bank doing certain types of corporate transactions. That looks really good. But sometimes a law student won't have anything. They will have gone to college, and then from there they go to law school. Well, a couple of things in your resume. So you do not want your resume to look like you're interested in things other than practicing law. So if you have a bunch of stuff in your resume that has nothing to do with practicing law, it's not necessarily going to be that appealing to potential employers unless it shows some sort of extraordinary leadership or something, and whatever that was. But you just don't want to detract from that. So if you're a litigator, I mean, you just have to think about how your resume is viewed. So things that have nothing to do with what you want to do are not helpful. And people do that stuff in their resume all the time. They put all this information about things that have nothing to do with their practice area, and that ends up hurting them quite a bit. So law students, you can always get hired. You just have, if you're not getting interviews, no interviews, it just means, product market fit. So product market fit. So that means, there's better people than you. Right? So there's nothing you can do to control that. So all you do to get interviews are easy. So let me pull up just a screen here to show you a couple of little tricks that you can use. Here, sure. And this is a great question. Another question that can help tens of thousands of people. So thank you for asking this. Okay, so when you're looking for a position, you have a lot of options. So if you have in California alone, there's thousands of cities. So let's talk about cities in California. You're going over to California. So here's all the cities in California. Look at this. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, I just want you to, this is opportunity. So all of these cities, like these are all, if you want to work in California, these are all cities in California. Like all of these cities, every single one of these cities has attorneys there. I mean, I'm just, my finger is getting tired scrolling through all these cities. So I just, first of all, like this will change your life and your career. Look, if you understand this. So every single one of these cities has attorneys working, right? So anyone that says, I can't get a job, I want to go to work and, whatever, I'm unemployed, I need a contract attorney, I need to sit around doing nothing, whatever it is. So I'm just going to scroll, randomly through this. Here's a big city, Oakland. Then you have, I've never heard of Oakley, California. So Oakley, California has 43,000 people in it. Okay, so let's go to look at that city. So what was this looking at? It was called Oakley, California. So let's just say you want to work in Oakley, California. Say you want to do personal injury law, just personal injury attorneys in, what the hell is this? Oakley, California. So right here, you're getting all of these people if you want to do personal injury. All you need to do, every single one of these people is in Oakley, California. I mean, this is just freaking insane. So if you want to be a personal injury attorney, which is good practice here to get into if you're unemployed or you're having a hard time getting a job, these are all the places that you can apply to. They just keep going. There's hundreds of them. And, and it doesn't mean you don't have to do personal injury in Oakley. You could do, let's just pick another random city. You could do, let's see what's this city here. Oxnard, California. Okay, 200,000 people. Who would have known? So you could do, let's see, corporate attorneys in Oxnard, California. Same thing. All of these, firms and places do corporate work. It doesn't look like they're all corporate, but all of these firms, you could work and do corporate attorneys. You just have pages and pages of them, of people that do corporate law in Oxnard, California. So what does that mean for you? That just means it's very, very simple. It means that were you to spend the time, like let's just think about this. You're unemployed. Were you to spend the time going and looking at all of these cities and looking for jobs? I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands of places just in California alone you could apply to. So pick your practice area and start, contacting these people. So what would I do if I was looking for a job? I mean, I've been doing this again for 25 years, and I know, how this business works. And so all you need to do if you're looking for a job and, is, here's this firm, Schneider Associates. You go here and you look at the firm, you see it says they do business law. If you want to be a corporate attorney, they have all these different things. This is in Oxnard, California. This is just one city out of maybe thousands of cities in California. I mean, I don't know how many cities, but just think about this. Think about the opportunity. Like, it's absolutely insane. So think about the opportunity that you have with all of these potential places you could work. So, what would I do? These are all the attorneys. I don't know. What's the name of the firm? Schneider Associates. I would go and I would send an email with my resume saying, I'm interested in doing corporate law. Could I talk to you for an informational interview or, get some information about your firm? I guarantee you, if you just did this one thing in Oxnard, California, just one, this is all you would have to do in this one city, you would find people that are interested in talking to you. You don't need to sit around, waiting for opportunities or thinking that you only need to apply to jobs on Indeed, or you don't need to sit around doing that. The only thing that you need to do is you need to find, you need to do some legwork and apply to people like this. I can't tell you how much power that you have, regardless of where you went to law school, to find positions doing this. And these, again, all these firms, all these cities, like no attorney in California, it would be freaking insane for you to be unemployed more than a day if you knew how to do this. But, this is what you do. You go in, we'll pick some random state. Let's just, Idaho, so Google, list of cities in Idaho. Look at all this. These are all cities, if you were in Idaho, that you could find places to apply to. So just think about this. I mean, I want to really emphasize like how much power you have. If you have a law degree, you can find places to apply. Blackfoot, Idaho. trust in the states in Blackfoot, serves Blackfoot. These are all trust in the states attorneys in Blackfoot. Now, this is one city. There's not a ton of them, right? So, but there's, hundreds of cities in Blackfoot, Idaho. So, same thing. You have all of these firms, all of these places with positions that you can work for in Blackfoot, Idaho. So I want to stress to every single person on this call that there's absolutely no reason for anyone to be unemployed. It's absolutely insane if you are unemployed. It's just stupid. There's no reason for anyone to be unemployed as an attorney. The reason is because there's positions out there. There's places you can apply without, places without them having a job, and you'll get hired. I mean, keep in mind the example I told you. I had a law firm in Malibu for, I don't know, 10 years or maybe it was longer. And during that entire time, I only received cold, inquiries from 2 attorneys in the entire history of that law firm. So think about how much power you have, how many firms you can apply to. I mean, what I've just told you, could change the course of your life, because there are so many places that are willing to work. You do not need to be unemployed. You do not need to settle. You can always find places that are going to hire you. If you look at all the cities in the state you're admitted to, and you search for people in that practice area, if you're a law student, I mean, anyone can get a job. I mean, anyone. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your stage of your career is, like how much or how little experience you have. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is your ability to make sure that you seek out and apply to as many places as possible. Okay, this is another great question. Thank you for asking this. I really do appreciate all these questions. You're changing people's lives, because this information is changing people's lives in an amazing way. Okay, during the presentation, you mentioned having a focused resume, like specializing in one area of the law. You also mentioned that it's bad to have gaps in your resume when you're not working. Is it better to have a resume gap, or is it better to take on a job in a field that is not within the field you're desiring to specialize in? The reason for taking the job is I'm not specializing in this mostly for economic reasons and to get some experience. So the number one rule of all attorneys, you should write this down, is to always have work to do. That's it. Always have access to work. To work as an associate, counsel, partner. Not as a contract attorney, not as a temp attorney, not as a whatever, as a associate or counsel or partner. That's your number one rule. You can never lose access to work. If you lose access to work, everything's over. Like it's game over. So that's what partners need to do. That's what law firms need to do. That's what associates, new attorneys, you always need to have access to work. If you don't have access to work, you're doing something wrong. So the example I just showed you in California, where there's thousands of cities, you can always apply to firms there, openings that you're going to get some interest. But you always need to have access to work. I don't care, you say take a job in the field that's not in the field you're desiring to specialize in. No, I mean, again, there's so much freaking opportunity. Like, why would you do that? Like, you don't have to do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense that you would do that. And the reason it doesn't make any sense is because there's going to be plenty of places you can work. Like, I don't care. I'm just I don't know who this is. I don't care what, where you're at. So let's list of our cities in Missouri. So we go here, list of cities in Missouri. Crazy. Look at 29, 70, 92, 127. So there's 127 cities in Missouri. Now, not all of these are very large. I'll do that to you, but Jackson and Kirksville or whatever. Like, if you want to be a corporate attorney in any of these cities, I guarantee you that there are corporate attorneys you could apply to and ask for a job in all these cities if that's what you want to do. If you want to be a corporate attorney, you can find places that will do it. You do not need to settle for a job that's not in your practice area. If you're aggressive and you represent yourself well, you're going to be able to get positions as a corporate attorney, really in whatever area of the country you're in. You can always find a job. It's just, it's lunacy to me. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, but it is lunacy to me that people are unable to get positions because there are so many cities and areas and attorneys all over the country. I mean, they're crawling out of the walls. They're just everywhere. So do you take a job in a firm that you're not specializing in for economic reasons to get some experience? Yes. So, if you're down for the count and you can't find jobs and you don't do a search in the way I'm recommending, then, what you need to do is you need to do whatever you can to get a job. So I'll give you some examples. My first wife was, or second wife, my second wife, and I've only had two, was divorced now, but she was a trademark attorney in Palo Alto. And when she lost her job, she lost it because I think the firm didn't have enough trademark work. When she lost her job, there was only one other trademark open in the state. She applied for it, didn't get it after an interview. And so then, she had to decide where she wanted to work. And the only places that were interviewing her, she might have been making the equivalent of $250,000. And then the only law firms that were interviewing her were, and this is a long time ago, so I'm saying the equivalent, were these insurance defense firms that were paying like maybe today's money, maybe 100. So had she wanted to continue practicing law, that might have been, if she didn't do a search for all the trademark attorneys in different cities in California, that may have been her only option. So, you always want to have access to work, but you never want to stop working. And if you have to take a job that is not in your specialty for whatever reason, then do it, because you can never lose access to work. Another thing that's kind of interesting to me is, any attorney can learn a practice area. So you go to law school, they don't train you how to be a corporate attorney or tax attorney, but you go to law school, you can always get positions. It's just, you always can get something, if you go to law school. So you need to, keep working. You can make millions of dollars as an attorney in any practice area. So it doesn't matter what the practice area is. It could be insurance defense, it could be litigation, patent, or whatever. You can make a ton of money. So if you throw yourself into any practice area and you become an expert in it, and you work in a big firm, or you get a big firm, you can always, be successful. And so just make sure you're always, at this point. And I'm very impressed with everyone for staying on these webinars. They're all on time, but I mean, literally, most of the people that started this webinar, 90% of them are still here. So it's commended for giving answers to these questions. Okay, in your experience, how often do law firms view entrepreneurial tendencies as a potential asset rather than a liability? Are there particular types of firms or practice areas where being entrepreneurial might actually enhance my candidacy, and how can I identify these firms during my job search? Okay, so entrepreneurial. So good question. So entrepreneurial attorneys are perceived as people that want to start businesses, that will take clients, that may leave to start a business, that aren't going to be happy, that are always going to be kind of twitchy and want to do other things. And law firms are typically not made up of entrepreneurs. They're made up of people that are able to sit at desks and take assignments and follow orders and do what people want for long periods of time. And instead of starting things and running things, they help people that start things or run things, essentially. Even if you're like an insurance defense, you're helping insurance companies defend against, lawsuits. So that's what attorneys do. So if you have entrepreneurial tendencies, like what type of firm or practice area would be good? Some of them, like personal injury firms, are very interesting. Like some of them will, give you a cut of the settlement you make or money you bring in. Personal injury firms. Other firms will, smaller firms may value you going out and bringing in clients or trust in the states and things. So you kind of have two types of firms. So this is again a very good question. There's a lot going on. So you have two types of firms. You have consumer facing, meaning working for individuals. So that would be, states, personal injury, etc. Like anything where, insurance defense, anything where the person that you're representing is a person. So it's like you're working on behalf of a person. And, there's a lot of different practice areas, but in general, anything that's consumer facing means you're working for a person. And then you have, company facing. So company facing means, working for companies. So you're representing companies, meaning you might be representing companies in a litigation. You might be representing companies in a, I don't know, but you're representing companies. That's kind of, your role. So anytime you're working on a company facing type of job, that's different. So these are much less entrepreneurial because you're just working hard on issues, I guess. So, and so, they need people that are going to work hard. It's very, very difficult for you to bring in clients if you're working for a big firm, because the big firm's going to expect you to bring in public companies and, huge businesses. And that's very difficult to do. And in reality, these firms need workforces, like, people that are going to work hard. So, and then that. So, but consumer facing, like if you're doing consumer facing, they value you bringing in business and bringing in small clients and, and that sort of thing. So you can kind of, it's more entrepreneurial. So, entrepreneurs, do very well in practice areas where they're representing individuals. Insurance defense is a little bit different because you're an insurance company, but they're paying you to defend people in auto accidents and things. But working for smaller clients is much more entrepreneurial. So you have that choice. What's interesting is a lot of times, like if you don't go to the best law school, what happens is you'll get jobs with law firms that are, that are small and consumer facing, but you get all this entrepreneurial experience. And often people that don't go to the best law schools, don't get the best jobs, go into these consumer facing jobs that don't pay a lot, actually end up being far more successful than people that go into company work, because people that go into company facing work are basically expected to be workhorses, to bill a lot of hours. They're paid for their ability to work very hard on, for things, and business is not as important. It's just being there and working. Whereas consumer facing, you're working for individuals. Things very interesting also about consumer facing work. And this is something to really think hard about. The thing that's most interesting about consumer facing work is when you do consumer facing work, you're representing, when you're representing individuals, you can start your own business. So, and this is what people do all the time. Trust and estates attorneys start their own business and they become very successful. They learn how to bring in clients. They hold dinners with old people where, they invite them and tell them about how to do their wills and stuff. Personal injury attorneys go out and find, people that have been in accidents and things, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. But that's what consumer facing attorneys will often do. So they will, work on that. And then company facing attorneys are often, much less entrepreneurial. And because of that, that's how it works. So you need to make that decision, but making the decision, if you're an entrepreneur, to go in that type of work, those are the best practice areas, because you can always, you'll learn trust in the states, or you'll learn personal injury, or you'll learn, whatever those practice areas are. Let me just take a look here if I can do something. So let me just take a look here. Search. So you look at, I'm just going to show you some examples. And there's so many freaking practice areas out there. So I just want to show you this example to help you. So when you choose your practice area, you have here, you can see all of these different types of practice areas where they have the potential to be consumer facing. So bankruptcy, you can help people with that. Construction, sometimes that can be consumer facing. Criminal law is consumer facing. You're working for individuals. Family law is very, very lucrative practice area you can get into, but that's very, very helpful. So if you go into family law, that can help you. And again, these practice area switches, by the way, when you go from a company facing practice area to a consumer facing practice area, they can be extremely profitable, and you can get jobs even if you're not in that practice area. Guardianship, healthcare is another consumer facing one sometimes. Immigration is all consumer facing. So, everything about immigration is consumer facing. Labor and employment, you can sue people in labor and employment, and that's consumer facing. Different types of trust in the states is consumer facing. Workers' compensation is consumer facing. So all of these consumer facing practice areas, if you go into them, you can be very entrepreneurial as opposed to trying to work in practice areas that aren't consumer facing. Great question, very, very good question. So let me just okay, so let's go to the next question here. Okay, so this is the next question. So you stated that most people looking for jobs are because they're being let go. What if it's because they can't stand their boss, with a long list of reasons why? In job interviews, I'm asked why I'm looking to leave, and I either throw my boss under the bus or make up another reason. What's the best approach? Okay, so this is a great question. So people will get in these toxic situations, and there are partners in law firms that just are so unpleasant and so difficult to work with that everyone that works with them is leaves or gets fired. I mean, there was one woman in the final firm I worked at. I mean, I worked at two, but there was a woman there who literally people would go to work for her, and then within 6 months they would just leave the firm. They just couldn't. She was so unpleasant, so difficult to work with, and then would trash talk the people that worked for her, even if they were good attorneys, because she just had this ability to drive people away. And it was so bad that people would leave, and they would often just abandon the practice of law. There was one woman I remember, she became a waitress. I mean, she went to Columbia Law School. She was just so, imagine. So there are people that are very, very difficult to work with. So if a law firm's asking you to leave, you can sometimes say it's not a good fit for me. I'm only working with one person. I want to be in a position where I'm working with more than one person. You can say that. Instead of doing that, you can say, I'm not getting the type of experience I want in my practice area. You can say that, the work's very slow there. There's nothing I can control. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can say in an interview that you don't, that won't throw your boss under the bus. Sometimes, by the way, if you're applying for work in a given city and you're, at similar type firms, people will often even know that the person you're working with is difficult to work with. So, but it's nothing that you need I wouldn't make it, anything, I wouldn't put my boss under the bus, but I would make up other reasons. Other reasons, not enough work, not getting enough experience in my practice here, work is slow, not a good fit for me, I'm only working with one person, all those sorts of things you can say, and law firms will kind of gloss over them. The other thing that I want to stress is anytime you're interviewing with a law firm or trying to work in a law firm, what happens is that law firm will have, a need to fill, and they don't want to go into too much detail with that. So your job as an attorney is to represent yourself, and you can give vague answers, you can do all sorts of things, but the law firm wants to hire you. If a law firm's interviewing you, they want to hire you and they need you. So they're not going to go into too much detail about this stuff, especially, if they like you better than the three other people that they're interviewing. They want to hire you. So you just have to, you can't go in with sour grapes. You have to be very positive. You can't say anything negative about your firm. But if you approach things that way, then you'll be in a good situation. Okay, here's a great question that I could get in so much trouble for answering and could be blackballed from the legal community for the rest of my life. Can you explain to a law firm that you were passed over for an opportunity and then forced to leave because of aggressive DEI practices in a law firm? Okay, so I'm assuming DEI means diversity and inclusion. So, again, I don't know a lot about this. I mean, I actually wrote a book. I'm the only person in the world to have wrote a book about law firm diversity. And if you search for the title, you search for law firm diversity, Harrison Barnes, you will see my book as well as me being attacked for other articles I've written about diversity and inclusion, which is just crazy. But anyway, so how do you explain to a law firm that you're passed over for an opportunity to force leave because of aggressive DI practice from the firm? This is a question that I don't really, and I always have answers to every question that people ask. And in this particular question, I would, probably not say anything about it. So, I know that, lots of law firms are trying to correct historical biases against people from different backgrounds and then, overcompensate to some extent by making sure that they're advancing and people from diverse backgrounds because they want to make sure that they correct societal balances. I mean, it's very interesting if you watch TV or movies. There's a big diversity inclusion there. I mean, they try to put people in positions of power that are from diverse backgrounds. In movies, like judges are diverse, the supervisors are diverse, because they're trying to correct societal imbalances. And so I guess to some extent, whether it's entertainment or a law firm, that may impact you. I think it's possible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for sure. I mean, but yeah, that could have some effect. So how do you explain it? You don't explain it. You don't say anything about it. You come up with kind of the reasons that I talked about earlier, which are things like, I wanted to, there wasn't enough work in my practice here. It wasn't a good fit. I mean, whatever you say, or I'm looking to, focus more on my practice here, so you don't talk about anything like diversity and inclusion, like I shouldn't even be talking about it. I mean, there's certain topics that you just need to avoid because they're explosive and people get very angry about them. So you need to avoid all these sorts of topics. You just can't bring them up, it's because it can hurt you. So, if you're good enough at your job, and you're good enough at your practice area, you shouldn't, allow that to hurt you. It's just, I had a thing happen. I actually had a long meeting at my house yesterday with the recruiter that does nothing but law firm placements. And he was getting ready to make, or partner placements. He was getting ready to make this large partner placement at this big firm. And the person that was hiring the partner was chair of the law firm. This is a big law firm. I mean, think like Baker McKenzie, like, firms of that size. And so he was trying to get a position in this huge law firm, partner of this huge law firm. And the chair of the law firm was not diverse. And then he was about ready to make this placement, and it was a big placement. I mean, he was gonna have a placement fee of over $1 million. And then right before they were gonna make an offer to his candidate, they chose, I think, a woman to be the chair of the law firm. And she came in and was like, we only want to bring in diverse partners. So even though this person had all this business, he couldn't get the job. So, so it does, I mean, there is a push for diversity. It's to correct past societal imbalances. And many times, it's kind of weird, like a law firm will be, representing a company, and the company is just like, what the hell? Like, we need people that reflect, the balance of society. Like, you can't just have people from one racial or, whatever, the background, or, sex and power. You have to reflect what society has. And so that's why law firms push diversity so much, because their clients demand it, and it's what it is. And so in order to explain that to a law firm, if you're passed up because of these practices, you just don't say anything about it. You need to be aware of that can impact you, and different firms take it more seriously than others. But yeah, you can't talk about being passed over. And I'm sorry to go into so much detail about this, but I guess it is an issue for people, and something to be aware of. So can you provide more insight into how the size of a law firm might influence the ideal application window? Also, how should an attorney adjust their application strategy depending on whether they're applying to small or large law firms? Okay, so good question. So the answer to that is, larger law firms are more structured. So what does that mean? So, they know what they're doing, and plan hiring according to express needs. So what does that mean? So that means, if you're trying to work there as a first year attorney, you're probably gonna, in your law school, you're probably gonna have to interview with that firm, in the first, semester of your third year of law school. So if you want to get a job in a larger law firm in your practice area, you're probably going to have to apply to that firm when they have an opening, when they have a need for someone in your practice area, meaning they're not just going to opportunistically hire most of the time. So that's kind of how large law firms work. Smaller law firms are less structured. Smaller law firms and new law firms are less structured. So less structure means they will hire opportunistically. So, that means that, if they hire, they'll hire, according to opportunities. So, and that just means that if they have someone comes along they will hire them. They won't think a lot about it. So you can often get jobs with smaller law firms just by throwing your application in the hat. Whereas larger law firms are going to be much more structured. So, and it's much more difficult to get jobs in larger law firms, especially as an experienced attorney, unless that law firm actually has an opening. So my strategy for all my candidates is, regardless of what they're trying, they should be trying to get positions always in smaller law firms, because there's going to be much less structure, and that will help them get positions. So that's how you really, one of the best ways to get a position is to, try to target smaller firms, regardless of whether you're a law student or whatever. And again, I think it's insane for anybody not to be able to get a position, because there's just so many firms out there. So especially smaller firms always can get jobs. Anyone can get a job. I mean, no, I don't care who you are. It's just crazy if you don't. You have to sometimes look at smaller firms and smaller markets. Okay, that's this next question. It's kind of broken up here. Does being dual qualified and another country make you more appealing to candidates to firms with international law? How much a factor is age, making a transition from in-house to law firm? Adding additional certifications and licenses to the relevant. Does adding certification and licenses to the relevant field, does this make you more attractive as candidate? Is portable business necessary to have for a law firm? Okay, so great question. And what I would say is, that just 1 second. I'll be back in like 10 seconds. 30 seconds. I have to an animal to find it. This may be one of the most entertaining things you ever see in a webinar, and you'll probably never see anything like this again. This is my parrot. I don't know if you can see her in the background. There she is. She was outside squealing, so I had to bring her inside. So she's going to keep me company for the rest of this webinar. I hope this is entertaining for you as is to me, but it's not entertaining for me. It's kind of annoying. Okay, so being a dual qualified candidate. So there's a lot of people on these webinars every week, because when we do resume review workshops, which I'd like to probably do in the next week or so, see if I was sending out something for that. But when we do resume review workshops, what happens is we always get a lot of international people. So being an international attorney trying to work in the United States is very difficult. It's difficult because your experience does not necessarily track the experience that a U.S. attorney would have. So if you get an LLM, you come to the United States, you're qualified in another country, it's very, very difficult to get a job. You need to be sponsored by the firm. That costs money. You also need to, there's a threat that you may leave and go back to your home country. There's all these things that are kind of working against you when you're trying to move from, if you're an international attorney. It's very, very hard. I mean, I see people do it all the time. I mean, I talked to one attorney not too long ago. She was from Venezuela and was able to successfully transition and become a very successful attorney in Miami. So it does happen, but it's just very, very difficult. And talking about international law, the problem with international law is there's just not a lot of firms to do that. So if you're trying to do international law, you're going to be kind of in a situation where, there's not a lot of firms to apply to. And so, what is their reason for hiring you? And it's just they have to have the work, and most firms don't have the work. So that's difficult. When you talk about age, making your transition from in-house to a law firm, that's a big factor. Again, I've talked a lot about in-house today, but it's much more difficult to get a position in a law firm when you're coming from in-house. It's not impossible, but it's extremely difficult. Age is also a factor. If you've been doing other things for 20 years and then you want to go back to a law firm, it's not ideal, because the law firms typically are going to want to hire younger people. And especially if you're an international attorney, it hurts you. And then is portable business necessary and nice to have for a new law firm? Yes. I mean, the senior attorney, you do want to have a lot of business. I do want to say a couple things. I had law school recently contact me that wanted me to put on seminars and things for LLMs. If you come to the US and you get an LLM, which I think a lot of people want to do, it's expensive. And a lot of times people will do it because they want to get a law degree and they want to take the bar, and they become an attorney. I'll just throw it out there that, it's incredibly difficult to get a position if you're, an international attorney. It's extremely difficult. I would say that, 95% of the time, it's not, it's not worth the money and time that you spend. I'm not, again, I work for a lot of law schools, but I'm just kind of throwing that out there that if you do that, it's not necessarily going to help you as much as you would like. So you highlighted that law firms stop considering candidates once they've begun interviewing others. What strategies would you recommend for attorneys who are applying to multiple firms simultaneously to ensure they're not left out of consideration? Additionally, how can an attorney tactfully follow up with a firm to check on their application status without appearing overly eager or desperate? Okay, so again, one point I made earlier is, there are, it's like, I mean, someone said this very recently. It's like if you're single and you think that, you're never going to be able to find another woman or man that you like, even though half the population, if you're heterosexual, half the population is if you're male, then half the world population is a female. And so you think, I need to get this person, I need to get them interested in me, it's my only chance, or whatever. That's insane. So it's complete insanity. Like, talk about following up. Sure, you can follow up, but at the same time, like, who cares? Like, who cares if a firm is not interested in you? I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, you have all of these firms that you could potentially work at. It doesn't matter where you are in the country. Like, again, like cities in Illinois. So I'm just making this point because I don't want, there's no reason to worry about not getting a job in one firm. And these are all the cities in Illinois. I mean, all of these cities have attorneys in them, probably in the practice area that you're in. So, there's just no reason to worry about one firm not interviewing you. Now, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm just throwing it out there that, if you want to do, employment plaintiffs work in any of these cities, there's going to be employment plaintiffs attorneys. They're all over. So, what do you do? I mean, you have to, you have to apply to, do your best to apply to places, that where you can potentially, that are interested in you, because there's thousands, tens of thousands of places where you can work. It's just, it doesn't make sense to worry about not getting one firm and to have to follow up. Now, you can follow up. I'm going to answer your question, but the idea that I'm just trying to make here is that there's so many places that you can apply to. So what are my strategies to make sure you're not left out of consideration? So here are my strategies. My strategy would be two things. So one, and you're not going to like this, first strategy is to send a letter, meaning postal to firms you're interested in. Send to, you send it to HR, of course, but also send to the head of the practice area that you're interested in. So what does that mean? Let me just show you. So let me just show you how sorry. And these are great questions. And this is amazing. It's very, very helpful. And so what does that mean? So instead of sending email, so email is bad. Instead of sending an email, what I would do, I'm going to go back to this stuff in whatever Illinois I was looking at. I'm going to go back to this stuff in Illinois. Again, this can change the course of your life and your career, what you're learning right now. And this goes too for the international attorneys, like trying to get jobs, so let's just take a look at some of these cities. Champaign, Illinois. I don't know anything about that. It's Champaign, Illinois. So list of, let's say, litigation firms, or what would we practice here? Employment attorneys in Champaign, Illinois. So you have all these firms. These are all these different firms in Champaign, Illinois. So let's look at this first guy, workplace retaliation. These two guys doing, why is that coming up? So it doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, let's look at trying to find like a little bit of a decent size here. There, Thomas Murner. So you have a lot of these smaller firms. It looks like Champaign, Illinois is a smaller city. So I'm just kind of looking at this here. But okay, let's look at these people. Champaign, Illinois website, adoption and guardianship. Okay, well, let's just fine. We'll find another one. I guess I'm not doing a very good job answering this question. Labor attorneys, best employment lawyers, best Champaign, Butler, Snow, employment lawyer. Okay, so this maybe there in Champaign. Let's see here, hopefully. Careers. Okay, so the Butler, Snow, you have this law firm, you have professionals. So you would go to their career site, and however you do that, you would apply through the career site saying you want to be an employment attorney, right? I mean, that's fine. This is Champaign, Illinois. I don't even know. So summer experienced attorneys. Okay, so you would go there and apply there. Then you would also look for attorneys that may be head of that practice area in Champaign. So you would research that, and you would see what the person is doing in Champaign, Illinois, and find their leading attorneys that do employment work in Champaign, Illinois. So that would really be, your strategy, and that would work. And you do that with every employment law firm that you can find in Champaign, Illinois, and you do that for other cities. So that would be my strategy. And, and then your next question was about how to follow up. So let me just, sorry, the right screen share. So does it make sense to follow up? Really, following up is not something that the majority of the time is going to help you very much. You certainly can, but the way to get exposed is to send a letter to the person in charge of your practice. That's it. So you send a quick letter and you ask these people, tell the people that you're interested in working for them in that practice area. Why is that so powerful? It's powerful because no one is sending letters. Everyone is just sending emails, and emails get deleted and people don't. You send a letter, it sits on someone's desk. And when it sits on someone's desk, it's much more likely to get attention than not doing so. So that's how I would recommend doing that. Okay, what's the most marketable bar to belong? Do you have any strategies for bar associations for in-house counsel? Thank you. Well, the most marketable, I think that's a good question. New York is a good bar because there's so many cities and places you can work in New York. So that gives you more places to work. But keep in mind that when you get to the bar in smaller states, like say Nevada, which I guess is not these days one of the smallest states, but if you try to work in like a state that's not very populated, then you're going to have much better luck than if you try to work in a highly populated state. So you go where there's not a lot of attorneys like you. So many times, if you try to work in a state where there's not a lot of people, a lot of attorneys, then there's less competition for the job. So New York is very difficult because so many people are trying to work in New York. It's just crazy, right? So trying to work in New York City, there may be a lot of places to work, but there's also a lot more attorneys than there are jobs. Whereas if you were to try to work in Kansas or North Dakota or South Dakota, there's just not a lot of people that are admitted to the bar there, and that's going to help you a great deal when you're trying to search for a job. Your final question is getting admitted as in-house counsel. Different states have different methods for admitting in-house counsel, so you can often be admitted to work as in-house counsel for the firm, for a company. There's limitations of what you can do. Different states have different methods for hiring in-house counsel to do this. In the webinar, you mentioned that applying too late can severely impact an attorney's chances of securing an interview. Could you please elaborate on how early one should ideally apply to maximize their chances? Are there specific times of the year or stages of the recruitment process where time becomes even more critical, particularly for different practice areas? Okay, so what I meant about applying too late is when a law firm has a job opening, if you apply after that opening has been open for a while, your odds of getting a job are going to be much less than if you apply to a firm where the job just became available. So what does that mean? It means that applying to a firm where where the position has just become available can if you apply late, they're probably interviewing other people, and so it's much more difficult to get the job. Now there are some places like if you're trying to get a job in West Texas or some other place, there are some places in the country where you will be able to where it's easier to get a job because there's not a lot of applications. But when you're talking about larger cities and larger firms, you're getting a lot of application. So where's timing more critical? A lot of times, I look for timing. I like this issue. So timing, means that, in the busiest practice areas or busiest practice area place it in November through December is often a good time to apply through December because there's not a lot of people applying. So there's not a lot of competition. So that can help you a great deal. So because there's not a lot of competition in those months, that makes it much more likely for you to get a job because your applications will stick out. And then other times where are very popular for people to apply to jobs, law firms will often have new calendar years. Depends on different times. Sometimes it starts in October. Most of the time it will start in January. So law firms have different calendar years when they're applying to firms. And so if you apply to a firm, say, I don't know, January, they may have opened up a bunch of openings because they're anticipating a lot of people to leave after getting bonuses and so forth. So that can also help you a great deal. You mentioned that one of the reasons attorneys open interviews is because they don't convey long-term potential. For those with a history of short, sensitive firms, how can they address this concern in their applications and interviews to reassure employees of the commitment? Okay, so there's a couple different ways of doing them. Sometimes an attorney will have been at like 10 firms. So they can write, corporate associate on their resume, and then they put the dates, so it'd be like, January, December, October, September of, or say 2010, present. You could say, currently working. Smith, whatever, that's etc. I see firms as a corporate associate, whatever, including X1, X2. So you write down a couple of firms there and you do it like that. That can actually work very well. But in terms of conveying long-term potential, and one of the best ways to ensure employers your commitment is making sure that your practice area is consistent on your resume, and then trying to make your moves explainable. So what's often explainable is moving from one type of firm to another type of firm to another type of firm that's better or more focused on your practice area. So that can help you a great deal. This next question is, I went to a law school that followed a rigorous C curve, and my GPA is lower than comparable candidates from other law schools. So I graduated cum laude. Wow, one full semester early. How does one overcome the relative difference in GPA compared to other candidates? So that's fine. So you don't need to say your grades. You just say, I don't know what's even around anymore. Detroit College of Law. I don't even think the College of Law exists anymore. You would just say, just graduated. So I don't know. I don't even. I'm just a little tired. Just graduated in September. You would say that's it. So that's all you have to say, and then you don't have to say anything about your grades. And then if a law firm looks at your background and sees you graduated from law, that's enough. That's all you need. That's here. This next section is about unconscious bias. So there's bias. I mean, I had a situation once where, this was 20 years ago, where a law firm had interviewed a candidate of mine who was African American, and they didn't want to go through with it. And the partner said to the recruiting person in the firm, I'm wondering if, this had anything to do with, with my perception or my bias that we're not hiring them. And so, law firms, are aware of that. I think 100% that law firms now realize that they made a lot of mistakes in the past with these unconscious biases, and they're trying to correct them. They're trying to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And in terms of biases, my advice to you, I think the people that are the strongest will be the best. If they don't any things that could be a bias in your background, I guess your race, sexual orientation, anything that could possibly prejudice the law firm against you, you just don't bring up. You just apply without bringing that stuff up, and that can be very, very helpful. And a lot of times people from different backgrounds won't like people. So, a conservative woman might be interviewing with a firm with all frat boys or something and not like them, but, in terms of unconscious bias, I think it's a good question. But I also think that in terms of your future, you never want to make an issue out of any of this, because if you do, it can, you want to appear neutral and not someone that brings that up. Next question. Is it possible to switch from litigation to corporate as a junior associate? How do you make that happen? The best way to make that happen is to try to do it within your existing firm. If you can't do it in your existing firm, you really need to try to do it. That's your number one best chance. Then you need to try to find a firm that's smaller, usually, that will hire you, that doesn't get a lot of applicants. So that can mean moving to a smaller market. It can mean, moving to a smaller firm. You can do it. It's not impossible, but especially as a junior associate, but it's certainly not easy. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being on this webinar. I think we're all done with the questions. I really appreciate everyone spending the time here. Listening to this for almost 4 hours is really pretty amazing that everyone was able to do that. I was going to do a little bit of sales here, BCG's Premier. So this is a new service that we're offering BCG that will help you apply to positions on your own. We believe are good fits for you and for anyone, so we can actually track down, send you to firms that may not have openings, but would be likely to hire you. So let me see here. If there's a chat, there's no chat, but this is BCG search, bcg-premier.php. It can help you apply to firms that don't necessarily have openings, or firms that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get a job with a recruiter. So if you go to the sub-site, click interested, it could help you get a job. So thank you everyone for being on the webinar. Just amazing work listening to this. It's, this particular webinar, I think that's some of the most important information you could ever learn as a law student or attorney about your career. So thank you everyone again, and I will be back next week.